live. Okay. All right. So this is a little bit different than what we normally do, guys. We are going to be talking with the developer of Open. Okay, tell me if I'm saying it right, and I got to change the current game because I never
Mhm.
do that. Is it Kedemara or
It's Kedemara,
Kedemara?
and
Okay.
it actually is the combination of these two words in Hebrew that means ancient earth. And
Oh,
I
that's cool.
Americanized the spelling, so the previous one had a Q and an apostrophe. So I figured just make it a little closer to how it would be pronounced. So Kedemara.
That's
Although
cool.
Kedemara, although Kedemara is not a bad idea, I could probably just make everyone cats in the game.
Kitty,
And you got a
Kedemara.
little DLC idea there.
Oh
It's
my
like, hey, were
god,
people too boring? We'll just put cat ears on everyone.
that's an idea. I say go for it, man. You never know who might buy. All right, so as I said, we are chatting with the developer of Kedemara, and there were a number of questions that came up while we were streaming the game, and they are more than happy to talk about what we were discussing while we were playing the game, and also answer any other questions that people may have since he's here live right now. So, why don't we start with? Why don't you just tell us a little bit about the game, just kind of refresh our memory a little bit. I'll just go through.
So the game is a very easy to pick up linear story that's I try to make as relatable for as many people as I can. So it's meant to be sort of an introduction to RPGs for anybody that hasn't played them before. Um, in a general sense, from a personal sense, what kind of pushed me to make the game or got me even interested in making it to begin with was a couple of years ago I had started getting into Dungeons and Dragons Fifth Edition, and I mean I'd played games as a kid a whole lot before, but it was too complicated to try to get something together on my own. So Dungeons and Dragons was cool because it was kind of like I could build these worlds, write these adventures, and people could make their characters, and we could all play along, and it was kind of a good facsimile for making a game. It was kind of close enough for me, and it started getting really difficult to schedule with everyone. It's when you do it on a weekly basis, it's like throwing a party every single week, and that's set up, moving furniture, cleaning, and that's just logistics. That's not even writing the adventure, and it was very fun and I enjoyed it. A couple of different things kind of came up. So one of my players had to move away. I probably had about 3 or 4 times where just from work or other things like that, people had to cancel, and it became really, really difficult uh, to kind of keep everything going and stay motivated because you'll have a cast of characters and you'll sit down for 2, 3 hours with somebody on a day off and talk about what their character wants to do, and you'd set up neat little situations for them to kind of get a chance to shine. And if they have to drop because of work, you sometimes have to rewrite the entire story because you've lost someone who's a pivotal character if they're in the main party. So those were some things that were frustrating, but I still had a decent set of about 4 or 5 people that would attend on a regular basis. But one of my friends, she had to move up to Dallas, and then I had a few others that, like I said, had job issues, and then we had to split up, and it was becoming very difficult for us to do it. And my sister was going back to college, so it was hard for her to stick with the group as well. So I ended up just kind of writing it off, and then I was talking with my best friend's daughter. She was about 9 or 10 at the time about it, and she would ask me all the time. We're not blood related, but she still calls me Uncle Andrew, and so she would tell me all the time. She's like, "Uncle Andrew, when are we going to get to play D&D together?" And her dad's my best friend, a great guy. Um, we kind of disagree on. He's a little more on the conservative side, so he had some reservations about Dungeons and Dragons and his 9 or 10-year-old playing it. So I can respect that. That's fine. That's cool. And so she then it got to the point where I was like, well, if your dad's not okay with it, I don't want to do something that's going to upset him. And then she was like, well, just tell it to me like a story, Uncle Andrew. And I was like, well, I can't do that because that's going to be too boring. And so uh, I had quit D&D. I didn't really have any creative outlet to speak of. And so it was getting kind of frustrating for me. And then I ran across RPG Maker, and I was like, oh, this looks pretty neat. They had it on sale. And so I was checking it out, and I was like, well, these actually look pretty great. I remembered seeing it way, way back in the day. But it looked like they had kind of came a long way, especially with the character generator and everything for MV. And so I thought to myself, this is going to be way out of my comfort zone, and it was incredibly difficult to start off for me because I'm not a programmer. I'm an IT guy, but I'm not a programmer. It just wasn't in my skill set, and I'm definitely not an artist, as y'all could tell by the game. Most everything was stock, so I started putting that together, and I was going, this is great. I can write something similar to a D&D adventure, and Naya gets to play it. This is so great, and I don't have to schedule and don't have to clean up afterwards. And not only that, some of my other friends who I wanted to play with that were still local and didn't get a chance to coordinate with them. There was a husband and a wife that I used to play in one of their friends' campaigns, and their wife used to always say she wanted to play through one of my campaigns, but it was hard for them to go to other places besides their own house because their oldest daughter was special needs. So it was hard for her to be away from her for any extended period of time without knowing, what could happen or what they could do if something occurred. So this was, in my mind, this was great because I could share some of the stuff that I wrote with people that I couldn't coordinate an actual D&D night with. And they could also stop at any time and, wouldn't have to worry about spouses getting upset with them for coming home late. So it was kind of nice there. So I know one thing that came up was how family friendly the game is. That was incredibly intentional.
I
Very
figured.
incredibly intentional.
I'm gonna interrupt you for just 1 second.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Just let everybody know. While he's talking, I'm not gonna interrupt him to say, "Oh, hi, how you doing?" Whatever, unless it warrants it and whatnot. So just if I'm not ignoring anybody, hi, murderer, hi, biker, and hi, everybody. So I'm not ignoring anyone. I just want to give him a chance to talk. So okay, go. You may continue with your story.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, just to kind of wrap up the how we got here thing. Obviously, if my best friend wasn't cool with his daughter playing Dungeons and Dragons for different connotations, you could imagine that the content needed to be rather clean in Kedemara for her to be able to play it, and not necessarily just that, as much as I wanted to have as broad of an appeal in terms of age range as I could. Uh, because another thing was whenever I would run into other kids and I would see the area that I live in, we have a lot of retro gaming stores and things like that. And I would go in and I would see kids that, would want to buy a Super Nintendo, but they're $80 now because they're trendy. And so it's prohibitively expensive. And when you think about it, if these kids can't afford that, or they can't afford, whatever retro gaming console or something along those lines, and enjoy just a basic, a bare minimum RPG, it seems like there's a need there, or perhaps there's a gap that we're not finding. And as an example, take a game like Minecraft, which I think has been an excellent bridge for getting kids into games that weren't just based on graphics, but more so on gameplay. And maybe that sounds a little pretentious, but I'd like to at least say that I kind of helped push the massive stone in that direction towards getting more young kids into RPGs and things like that. And hopefully playing my game for free. And if they get a kick out of that, that'll get them to play some of the classics like Final Fantasy III or Phantasy Star or Legend of Zelda, any of those. So that's and I also wanted it to be something where if you had nostalgia for older games and, as an adult, a lot of times if you sit down and there's a game and it's far too complicated, you just go, I'm pulling my hair out of work every day. The last thing I want to do is have to come here and figure out the sphere grid or the junction system from Final Fantasy. And you just want to kind of sit down and just go, okay, I leveled up. Give me a point or two. give me this or give me that. And so in that regard, my design's a little self-serving. But I figured there's got to be a couple more people out there that think like me and just want something that's a nice, straightforward RPG, similar to like Mario RPG or something, just something simple and enjoyable, and that you also don't have to feel guilty about playing in front of your kids, thinking that someone's gonna randomly drop an F-bomb or something along those lines. And that's nothing against games. Some of my favorite games are a little more on the racy side.
Yeah,
It's
my
just
game falls into that category. So.
it's just, I mean, like, because one of my favorite games is Dragon Age 2, which I know that's
Oh
a little
yeah, yeah.
vitriolic, but I like a lot of the characters in that. And it's funny because every time that I say your name, I feel like I'm Varric, the dwarf, talking to the main character in Dragon Age 2 since his name was Hawk. So I'm always like, yeah, Hawk this, Hawk that. So yeah.
Nice.
So that's kind of how I got started with it. And uh, one thing that I probably anticipate as being a question that would come up is why would I put it on Steam? And one of the questions that I've gotten from a couple of my friends who have been, I would probably say, creative consultants on this is, why didn't you charge anything for it? Well, one, I don't think it's done yet. That would be number one. Number two, I want as many people to be able to play it as possible. And three, I actually forgot what I was going to say for the third one. I'm scatterbrained. Oh, now I remember. Yes. Ease of updating. That was the other thing. Initially, I started with just using Dropbox, and I would give it to people. And of course, with because you and I both know bugs and mistakes never happen in
Yeah.
game development ever. Those just
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
you reach this point where you just cease having to deal with that. But Steam was great and it was totally worth $100 because I could just push out an update and do it at 4 a.m. in the morning and make sure that anybody who starts playing the game gets the update. And so that, and also pulling my hair out trying to figure out how to use the deployment kit
Features.
was still worth it. And thanks to you getting Steam achievements working,
Yeah.
that was frustrating for quite some time.
Yeah,
But
I was actually really glad that I found that plugin. It works beautifully. You put the files in where they need to go. You put the plugin commands in RPG Maker MV wherever you need them to go, and it works. And that's all I
yes,
care about. So,
right on.
Somber just asked a question. What
Sure.
was your inspiration for Tessa? I think we're all kind of wondering what her
Oh
main
boy,
purpose
Tessa.
was in the game, and I'm very curious myself as well.
So Tessa, everyone always asks about Tessa. Every play tester thought that she was their favorite, said that she was their favorite character, and a lot of them were like, she's the mascot for the series, right? And I'm like, sure, why not? So any of the characters that I write are all a composite of various people, and then there's a little bit of my personality in each of them. But for the most part, everyone is congealed from multiple people that I know. Tessa is uh, straight up. There's a lot of traits that she has that my friend's daughter, the one that I started, making this game for, Naya, she's like her. Naya's a very smart little girl. She's very curious. She loves to read. She's a real big bookworm. She loves anime and manga, and she's she never surprises me with what she says. She's a very original, very creative girl. And so a lot of times, um, that was pretty much partly the basis for Tessa when I started needing to actually flesh her out. Um, so it's a mix of that. When I was doing the tutorial for RPG Maker MV for the first time, uh, and they go through and tell you to use all the stock characters: Harold, Lucius, Therese, and Marcia. Poor Marcia got cut because I was like, well, I'm going to try making my own character. So while I was doing the tutorial, I made Tessa up, and her name was originally Testa. Um, like she's a test, and I had to feminize it by putting an A at the end since she was a girl. Um, this is how my brain works. But I ended up doing that, and so even like Mr. Kitty, I wanted to make her companion in the tutorial a cat, but I didn't think the cat looked stern enough. So I used the chicken portrait. And so
Oh my god,
so
that was
that
pretty
was
funny.
so a lot of her little quirks and things like that were born just of me doing the tutorial. But when I needed to flesh her out and make her bigger than just what I call a single serving character, like we used to have for NPCs in Dungeons and Dragons, if it was somebody you were only going to run into once, then I would kind of refer to him as a single serving character. They only needed one trait that was really strong to kind of set them apart or get you through the story, but I needed to make her a little bit bigger than that. So she's kind of grown to be, I guess, an avatar for curiosity, being yourself, being unique, and the other thing is also trying to be everybody's friend, or maybe just trying to be friendly to everybody. She tries to give people the benefit of the doubt, and even maybe sometimes even to her detriment, like with the wisps and the fairies. She just wanted to play. Um, and things like that. So she's that's kind of what's kind of gone in and made her who she is.
That's cool.
Yep.
Okay. One main question. Officially, how old is am I saying the right? God, I guess
Deirdre.
Deirdre.
Yep.
Okay. How old is
Yeah.
Deirdre?
That
Officially.
I'm gonna explain the name too, because that's
Okay.
a tough one. I have, just like my last name, no one ever, usually no one gets it right. The funny part was that one of the people that's I would say a creative consultant was a guy I met on the indie game devs on Facebook, and his name is Ross, and he's a creative director. He's probably got about 20 people under him, and he messaged me after I had asked a question on there and said, hey, if you got any questions about stuff or you want to just bounce something off me, me and my audio guy are, always looking for fun games to play. Just let us know if you want us to play test it. So ended up talking with him and everything like that. And I had just picked the name Deirdre because I had heard it said by somebody in a skit as their name. And then I ran it past him and I was like, Ross, because he's Scottish, like lives in Scotland. And so I was like, which is, he's closer to Ireland and all that than I am. So I figured he probably would know better. So I was like, am I saying this correctly when I say Deirdre? Is that how you would say her name? And so he said there's like 5 different ways you could say it, but he's like, it's Celtic and Scottish enough. He's like, yeah, as he put it, it'll pass. So I was like, okay, cool, good. But when I had looked it up, yeah, that's supposed to be the correct pronunciation for that region is Deirdre.
Hello, people who've just joined us. We are talking with the developer of Kedemara. What do you even want me to call you?
Oh, you can just call me Andrew. It's fine.
Andrew, we're talking with developer Andrew here about his game, some questions about the game, inspiration for characters, for the name, things like that. So we're just chatting with him tonight for a little bit. So how old is she officially?
Wait, did I answer that that question just now?
I'm
sorry, what was it?
You spoke about the name.
Sorry, I wasn't trying to derail there. It was how old is Deirdre? Was
yes,
that the question?
Officially, because we're all a little curious. How old is she officially?
Deirdre is 16 when the game starts.
All right.
Yes. And I'll go ahead and go through with everybody else just because I'm sure we're all curious. Caleb is a little older than 16. Amy is 19, and I watched the video again, so to make sure I wasn't wrong. 82, and in 2 weeks, Tessa is 83.
Okay, all right.
Just to set the record straight, but yeah.
Fair enough. Okay, well, there was another. What was one? Somebody asked one. I'm trying to remember who asked what. Oh, okay, somebody asked about the references for the jokes in the game, because it seems like there's a ton of different movie and TV references, and we picked up on some, and some I think we may have missed. I'm not sure, but oh yeah, biker, yes, biker ass.
There's yes, there's a very large amount. Is there any in particular that you had any questions on? I didn't really make a list of. Well, okay, I'm not gonna lie. There was a couple of things. There was a couple that you guys had picked up on, and I was like, oh snap, nobody's gotten that before. Poo gas. So that is. You are 100% correct. That is a Freakazoid reference. Right on. It is the set. Now, one thing I don't know if anybody else caught this. Crud vapors. So that was a later episode whenever Freakazoid had tried to learn how to levitate bricks or things with his mind and hit himself in the head with a brick. He was in the hospital because he suffered a concussion and all he could say was brick. Now, the problem was that Roddy McStew, his driving instructor and mentor, who was a Scotsman, probably see where I'm going with this. He and Cosgrove, Freakazoid's like cop best buddy, had to go out and deal with some. I think they were trying to track down Cobra Queen and Cave Guy. They'd stolen a crown or something like that. And so they had talked about poo gas a few times earlier in the episode. And so whenever Cosgrove and Roddy are down there in the sewers looking for them, Cosgrove just turns around and says, hey, Roddy, what do they call poo gas in Scotland? And he says, crud vapors. So
makes sense.
That was where that was from. So
Yeah, that was yeah. I remember that episode of Freakazoid. I was like,
And
wait, that's all I could think of is Freakazoid. It's like okay, my mind immediately went there. So
that was where that one came from. I think another one that I had saw the Duck song. So that was one of Naya's favorite songs. My friend's daughter, who I was partially making the game for. I know you had picked up on that as well, which was as rare than you'd think. A lot of people don't. But yeah, that was a favorite song of hers, and she was absolutely thrilled when she saw that was in the game. I was
yeah,
very happy to be able to
I
sit
almost
there
forgot
and see
about
her
that
do that.
song until I saw
So
that.
that trying to think of anything else. But yeah, I mean, as far as the references go, there's not necessarily a rhyme. Oh, glitterberries. Yes. So it's kind of hard because to put a name on them, but those berries that they ran across in the forest. So later on, when you wake Tessa up, Tessa refers to them as glitterberries. Glitterberries is a reference to a Daria episode where I don't know if anybody watched that. It was a spinoff from Beavis and Butthead, and Daria was kind of a rather dry and cynical teenage girl.
Thanks for the raid,
And she
Joseph.
went out on a camping trip with her family, and her dad went out to go gather berries for everybody to eat. And turns out they were psychotropic, and her sister referred to them as glitterberries. So that was
That,
a reference to that.
that's a deep cut. Wow.
There's a bunch of them. I mean, I could take hours going through all the references. It's basically whatever's on my mind or what I think could fit the scene or would get a giggle out of everybody. Kind of a meta Easter egg if you think about it. You know, it's not really an unlockable or achievement in the game, but if something seems out of place, it's probably a reference.
Not bad. Not bad. I like it. Now, you already talked about how you were trying to make the game accessible, and you talked about how you made the game free for a reason because you wanted it. You know, in your mind, it's not finished yet, and you want it to be as accessible as possible to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of a question to come to segue into from that. I had something. Don't you with some other references? Yeah, exactly.
Well, in that regard, the playthrough stuff, one of the things I was concerned about initially, and this kind of showed. I just want to say first off, I probably should have started with this a lot earlier than I did. I want to thank everybody. I know that probably sounds like I'm being disingenuous, but it's actually really hard to get um, unbiased, or not even necessarily unbiased. I'd say uninformed opinion or impressions about the game.
Yeah.
Because most of the people that you're going to talk to whenever you create one are going to be people that you know. It's going to be friends, my D&D buddies, my gaming buddies, everybody else like that. And if they know me, they know my sense of humor whenever we're friends and we joke around. They can kind of see, you know, where I'm coming from, or they hear a joke or something and they can kind of get that. So my sense of humor they pick up on because they know I'm kind of a goofball and things like that. And so one of the big concerns I always had was how is this translating to other people? And the only other person I could think of that I got a good unbiased a good unbiased opinion from was another streamer from Italy of all places, and he actually played my game, and he spoke English a heck of a lot better than I spoke Italian, and he was very kind enough to email me back. I had a few questions about some of that and just wanted to know a general impression of the game. But sorry, so to not to get too off track, getting to see everybody's reactions and seeing if a joke fell flat, if a reference seemed either too far off or a little too in the face and cringy and things like that. It's and trust me, there were definitely some changes made. I mean, I would say that overwhelmingly, I took this as excellent advice and market research because nobody knew me from Adam, and so it wasn't a situation where I'd go, well, they're just being nice, and they're gamer friends from work, and they don't want to be rude about it and things like that. So it was fantastically helpful, very very helpful, and so there was a few things that it kind of pushed me to step outside of just going. I couldn't figure this out before, and then it became commonplace. The nameplates was one that I had just put out of my mind and was just like, well, I can't figure this out right now. I'll figure it out later. And whenever it got brought up, I was like, no, this is really annoying. I just conditioned myself to go, it's fine, and spent 4 hours trying to match it up. So that particular thing was actually there's a plugin that Kadokawa makes called Amato or Mado, and it will generate an image for the window, the text window, and for a few others, the baked-in menus that they have. The problem is that Yanfly's plugin for main menu and options and other things like that, it references the original window file. The one from Kadokawa makes 3 other files that aren't named window. And so those files are like twice the size of the regular Windows image file. And so I thought to myself, well, all I have to do is just chop it in half, and then I can put that in there, and maybe that'll get this fixed. So nothing was working, and then I just kind of went for broke and took one of them and renamed it window.png, and I put it in there, and it works perfectly. And I still have that dent on my forehead from beating my head against the wall after that. Don't know why I didn't just try doing that first, but no, but that in addition to some of the references and jokes, some of the way the scenes went out, and some of it was really, really good advice. I really do appreciate it. So it's not every day that you can kind of walk in and get people to, play any game unprovoked, and much less one that takes 3 to 5 hours to get through. So it was massively helpful. So I really do appreciate everybody sitting through and taking a look at it. You especially.
No, it was fun to play. I actually quite enjoyed it because I like to try and go in as blind as possible when I play a game. So I didn't want to look up anything. If somebody suggests a game to me, I'm not going to check it out first or anything other than for content to make sure it's Twitch appropriate.
Right.
Beyond that, I put it on my list. I'll do the wheel, and it just randomly got picked. And I'm actually glad I picked your game because there's a certain amount of charm to your game. Because at first it felt a little it felt a little amateurish, but then as it started to kind of go into the game a little bit more, I was like, okay, this is definitely the kind of game that is meant to be my first RPG sort of game. And as I said during the stream, I can respect that 100%. So I'm actually glad you made a game like that because it is a good jumping point for a lot of people to have something like that to just get into, and then you just, okay, I've never played an RPG before, or a young kid or something like that, and it's something that's accessible to a lot of people. So I think that's really good that you did it that way, and not only that, but also free on Steam to get it out there as much as possible.
Oh yeah, and you're very perceptive because it is indeed my first game. I have never made another game before in my life, and so and it's a totally different medium. I mean, to some degree, having the D&D world building background and all that is helpful. The downside is that kind of like I was sort of getting at with talking about having people to play it that don't know you or know your sense of humor. The other bad thing is that you can't really judge people's reactions as well unless you're sitting down next to them, and that creeps them out whenever you're got a notepad and you're writing things down as they're playing. And then there's also the temptation to be like, well, go over there in the shed, go in the shed, just you never know, you might find something fun over in the shed, go check it out.
The backseat drive. Yep.
Right. And so with D&D, you can in real time get that from people, and that's a blessing and a curse in some ways, because you're also on the hook to always be 100% when you're DMing. But at the same time, when something's just not feeling right, whenever you want when you want something to be really dramatic and you're just going, the group is just not there, you have the ability to skip over that. So, but yeah, the downside is not being able to get that honest reaction from people. But that's that's where this has been super valuable to me, and I got the changes uploaded today. So if you haven't played it yet, you won't have to deal with transparent nameplates. You won't have to deal with that. That would be another thing. In addition to all the other bugs, there was a list, and there was a lot of times when the first 5 seconds, whenever people would say something, and I'm like, oh, come on, is that really that? No, that's annoying. No, that's right.
Okay, now, yeah, okay.
I need to change that. Yeah, they got a point. Yes. So, I would say I know we wanted to allocate 10 to 15 minutes to talk about worms on here. Worms with a Y.
Okay,
I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time for that.
I already explained it on. I explained it on stream. I'm happy with my explanation. But if you wish to try and defend your
Well,
your
honestly, this is one of those situations where I wish I had something really compelling and really, boisterous and bombastic. But the simple truth of it was, initially they were sandworms with an O, and then there
yes, man,
was
I did.
a sprite. There was a battler I think I found that was decent enough to look like the ones from Dune,
Okay.
or like Twin Rova from from Majora's Mask, and which was what I was initially wanting to go with, but I could never find a character sprite for it. And since there's so much dialogue in that scene, having a character sprite that's like yay big, and then you go in there and it's ginormous, and we couldn't just say that it was one of the South Sea Corsairs. They're kind of tough about letting worms in. They got a very tight, uniform and regimen there. But so I was like, okay, what do I have that's big? And I also have an enemy, graphic for as well. And so there was the one that you saw there. And I was like, well, this is obviously not a worm with an O. So how could I phrase this? So it was about that time I was scrolling through and saw it was like an update or an announcement that I don't want to say their name because they might try to sue me. Blizzard had about Warcraft 3 Reforged coming out, and I was like, oh, that's right, the undead had frost worms. That's right. And I looked up a picture, and the frost worms in Warcraft 3 have wings, forearms, and legs and tails. And that
Of course
was
they
my
do.
rationale
Of course they do.
with calling it a sandworm. I'm sorry
Oh,
I don't have a
Blizzard.
more compelling argument, but I just
Oh.
copied off Blizzard's paper. That's
Let's
pure and
just add
simple.
this
That's all there is to it.
to another terrible thing that Blizzard has done recently.
Yes. They have screwed up my
I
mythology.
can't. And the fact that I spent 6 minutes on this during stream.
It's okay. It was a compelling speech.
Yeah.
Had it come out of my own mind, and I hadn't been so lazy to just go, oh well, Blizzard did it. It must be right. Then I would have been looking for artists to replace it. I'd still replace it. In all fairness, it does bother me too. And as soon as I can find an artist to do it,
it's your own world, your own mythology. If you want that to be a worm, then more power to you, man. I'm not going to argue with that.
See, I was gonna be snarky and say that, they obviously had to evolve claws and and forearms and everything like that, so they could burrow more effectively through the sand.
More effectively.
But with wings too, of course, so that they can push the dirt out of the way and brush it off themselves. But I decided, no, I'm just going to be honest.
The man had this one. Oh god, I forgot about the cheeseburger BG. Good god, that's right. You guys can be. Hey, Wilman, how you doing, man? Okay. I know somebody did bring up that they wanted to know more about what was going to happen with Chapter 2. We'll bring that up in a minute, in a little bit. Do we have any more questions about Chapter 1, the characters, the process, anything you guys want to talk to Andrew about for Chapter 1 that you guys were curious about, that we haven't really addressed yet?
Ask me whatever, just not for the last 9 digits of my social security number. Then we're fine. That's all the digits in a social security number, by the way, for those who aren't U.S. citizens.
Oh, God.
Let's see.
That's my stream upload.
Man.
Okay, so I don't know what you're asking. Is there about what the saves getting deleted? I've never had that happen with an RPG Maker game before, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Saves getting deleted?
Well, he was asking how do you upload your game without it deleting the saves, and I've never known an RPG Maker game to have that issue.
I'm not sure if that's a cloud saves issue. I have cloud saving enabled on my game.
Oh, okay.
So I have that set up for the application in Steamworks, and so it should save them out in the cloud, and that way you can pull them down regardless of whichever computer that you have it on. As far as the technical aspect, if it's one that doesn't have cloud saves, I'm not sure. I'd have to dig a little deeper. I'm not sure.
I'm not really sure either, and I'm kind of curious about that myself because I've got my game coming out, and if I have to make it fix, I don't want it to delete every single save that I've got. So Now, when you did the cloud, I'm just going to ask you as
hmm
developer to developer. When you did you just click on enable cloud save and that was that, or did you have to do something special to enable the
It's
cloud
going to ask
saves?
you for a target folder,
Okay.
and the stuff that you put in the content folder when you're about to upload it with command line, and it's going to say, okay, well, what's your target for what you're cloud saving, and you'll specify.
Where you wanted to
I
put the
believe it's the
saves.
file extension for it and the folder that it resides in. And so then
Okay.
it'll put, and you can allocate a certain amount of limit, like as far as storage space for it and how many that it'll save out there. I would say if you're having problems with that, check and make sure that you have enough storage space set aside on the cloud.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I think they'll let you allocate like a megabyte or so per game for per user. So, but that might be something to check on if you're having problems with that.
And I'm not even using the GUI uploader. I just have it where mine's under a gigabyte, so I can just upload it directly to Steam. I
Oh,
click
okay.
on because they just started doing. I don't know when they started doing it, but it looks like it's kind of a new feature where you go into your builds and there's a hey, if yours is under 1 gigabyte, click here. You click there, and then you can upload everything directly as a zip file, which is what I've been doing. So my
Right.
way may also delete save. So I think I'll have to enable cloud once this is all done.
Mm.
So I'm gonna make a note for myself,
It's not too bad. If
so
I
I
can
don't
figure it out, anyone
forget
can
that.
figure it out. Trust me. And they have good documentation.
Whoops.
Steam's actually pretty helpful in that regard.
Okay. Enable cloud saving. There, that'll help.
I'm gonna look.
Hey Joseph, how you doing, man? And thanks for that raid, by the way. I don't know if you heard me when I said it, but I did say thank you. And those of you who are just joining us, we are chatting with the dev of Kedemara. We're asking him some questions about his process, about the game, characters, whatever you guys want to know, as long as it's nothing personal or too weird.
As long as if it's related to game stuff, or I
Oh,
mean, even D and
um,
D, anything like that that y'all would want to ask, absolutely, that's totally fine.
what was the inspiration for Deirdre? And besides more in the, I'm assuming this is what Panda means. Besides more chapters in Kedemara, do you plan other games like to make more or like other games, other game series, anything like that? But the first question is, what was the inspiration for Deidre?
Okay, so yeah, the inspiration with Deirdre, she started off as a character that I had in one of the D&D campaigns. She was a side character, but she was kind of in the middle. She wasn't quite single serving, but she was kind of a long-term NPC, and the characters knew her. She was a prominent figure and things along those lines. So that was kind of visually where I got the idea for her, and so that's where we've got the high ponytail and things like that. The character art that I found for her, that was kind of where that came from. She's a few. I had this thing where I would make different iterations of the same character if they were an NPC across different campaigns, because a lot of times you will have different people playing in different D&D campaigns that you DM. And so you can kind of reuse characters and, not being completely carbon copies, but sometimes they actually like seeing them again. Take, for instance, Amy. Amy is a straight, pulled her out of my first big D&D campaign. They called her Sister Amy, and it's funny because that was even what one of my playtesters said. He's like, "Oh, I was so stoked, Sister Amy's in the game," and so she's a character that's been around for a while. But as far as Deirdre goes, she was actually starting off as in the main party, but she wasn't the protagonist. Ironically, Caleb was actually going to be the protagonist, and it started off. Caleb was pretty much basically the way he is now, and the game was going to be a little even more parody than it currently is, believe it or not. Because Caleb was just meant to embody every single stereotype that you would have of any RPG or fantasy character or things like that. Even down to his title, the Hero of the Ages, is just a rephrasing of Link's the Hero of Time. And so I took so many different little tropes and things like that, and it got to the point where I was going, Caleb's a nice character, but a lot of times players are going to put themselves in the main character's shoes. And when you're constantly having to deal with Caleb goofing up and kind of making the really kind of silly mistakes and things like that, a lot of times that can make the player feel like they're the ones that are making mistakes and that they're being railroaded into doing that.
Yeah,
Also, there's the introspective dialogue where Deirdre will talk to herself in the little black box of what she's thinking. And so we all know that if it was Caleb and introspective thinking, the box would just be blank. there would be nothing in there. He just speaks his mind. There's really not much else going on there. But so for her, she initially started essentially the same as she is now, except she was a supporting character. And then I thought it would be a lot more interesting, and she ended up becoming a more interesting character. And I said it'd be funnier if Deirdre was actually the main character, and Caleb just thought he was the main protagonist, but was another party member. So
It works.
the dynamic there is that Caleb, throughout the entire story of Kedemara, thinks that he's the main character and doesn't realize that he's not. He just thinks he's helping Deirdre along the way, and so that was kind of it. But as far as her personality goes, she's a composite, just like most all the others. There was a little bit borrowed from her D&D character. There was a bit from a few different women that I knew, and then this one's kind of obvious. I don't know how many people have seen this movie. I'm not sure what age range we're dealing with over here, but I believe it was in the 80s. They had a movie that was based on the comic Little Orphan Annie, and so Annie, being an orphan, in this movie, it was interesting because there was a lot of parallels in that I thought made for a good female lead protagonist. One of the scenes that kind of I remembered so much because I'd seen this as a kid and remembered as an adult. There was these group of this gang of boys that were going and chasing this dog around. They tied cans to its tail, and they were hitting the dog and everything like that. Well, Annie sees this and she goes in there and tells him to leave the dog alone, and tries to get him to get away from it. One of the boys pushes her against a wall. She acts like she's walking away and turns around and decks one of them. Then the biggest boy out of the entire group walks up and tries to swing at her, and she just knocks the crap out of him. And then they all run off scared. In my opinion, that was exactly how I would imagine, Deirdre would have been at age 9, 10, something along those lines. I started her off in the orphanage in the game very intently, because if she was just kind of a rough and tumble character, it would kind of seem like she was, if she was always a straight man, it would seem like she didn't have a good sense of humor. It would seem like she didn't have a good attitude, like she was kind of bitter. And the orphanage was to show that with the kids, she could be very motherly, she could be very compassionate, and she didn't like seeing others that were, maybe weaker or younger than her getting bullied around. So that was a real big influence on her core character, was kind of that. And then you have a lot of other female warrior characters out there. I grew up watching Xena Warrior Princess. Thought she was really awesome, and then being more abstract. I know, I'm sorry, it's cornball. I'm really aging myself here when I'm talking about Xena Warrior Princess. Yeah. Hercules. I didn't pull from that for Caleb at all, but that was one of them, and there was some other things. Just kind of her attitude, where Deirdre's, she can be a bit snarky, she can be a bit of a trickster sometimes. When it boils down to it, she doesn't like seeing people get bullied. She likes to stick up for those that are maybe weaker than her or something along those lines. And she's a loyal friend, and she'll put up with a whole lot. And if Caleb's proof of that. Tessa's proof of that. And she's got a good sense of humor. She's not perfect by any means. I know when y'all were playing through, y'all didn't catch as many of the dirty fingernail and broad shoulders jokes that they made about her in some of some of the dialogue in there. Although I know y'all, I tell you what though, I was impressed. Y'all found the second secret room with the orc in there, and
yeah.
His comment about her knuckle hairs getting stuck in his teeth for weeks, and just the face from Deirdre was, yeah. So her character kind of evolves a little bit later on when you start adding more characters to the party as a bit of a straight man character, but she likes to cut loose every now and then, and she's kind of street smart, down to earth, and she just likes to, have fun, be adventurous, and all that. So
cool. Joseph asked, what was your production schedule like? Did you have a production schedule, and how often each week did you set aside time to make the game? And that kind of segues into a question BG asked, how long did it take you to make the game?
Okay, so chapter one, as far as I'm concerned, is still a work in progress. As I just uploaded changes today, but for me, this was a kind of a learning as I was going situation. I ended up getting RPG Maker and V. I want to say it was about June, I think, of last year was whenever I grabbed it, and it was a learning process at first. I went through the tutorial and I was used to world building, and so as far as creating characters and story, that wasn't going to be the longest or strenuous part for me. It was actually going to be just learning to how to event and program. And going back now and revisiting some of mine, I'm just like, what on earth was I thinking when I coded that way? I'm like 3 pages for somebody to just walk up to a campfire. What was I thinking? So I've made some improvements on my efficiency when it comes to things like that. But to not ramble on too long and answer the question, I released it October 31st or October 30th. I'm sorry, was whenever I released chapter one, and I'd been working on it since probably about July or August. Initially, this game was going to start off because I had a friend who was an artist that was going to collaborate with me. This game was actually going to start off as an RPG set in a 1950s American high school. However,
Whoa.
that was going to be too difficult to put all the art together. But so I was like, why don't we'll just keep it simple, and then we'll make some modifications onto the base stuff. For business and scheduling differences, he wasn't able to devote as much time to it as he would have liked. And so I decided to just kind of proceed with what I had available, which was stock assets or ones that I could, buy online from the RPG Maker store or other things like that. So all in all, chapter one was not as good as it is now. Um, every time I've had a good idea or something's irked me, I've gone back and changed it. So I've kind of George Lucased this quite a bit, even though it hasn't been out for a year yet. But I would say to get it where it is now, I would still say it's taken me probably 6 months or so to get chapter one. As an aside, because I know we'll get to chapter two later. So it's about 5.5 hours of content in chapter one. Chapter two is probably going to be closer to 7 or 8. I'm about halfway through the major story arcs I would say more like milestones for chapter two, and it's already about 4 hours of content. So chapter two is going to be very big. Still going to be free as well.
Oh, wow.
That's not going to change. So
Now, are you gonna make it as a DLC for Chapter One, or are you releasing them each as their own separate entity on Steam?
I'm gonna release it as an update. One, because I don't want to pay another $100 to Steam to put another application up. Sorry, just being
Good point.
honest.
Good point.
And then I've had a couple of other friends and some other people who have well-intentioned told me, when I've told them how many downloads we've had, they're like, well, if you charged $1, you'd have that much money in the bank to spend on it. And I'm like, well, yeah, but there's more people who are going to get a free game than a one that costs money, and more people are going to give it a try if it's free. And the other thing is, I am not necessarily in a situation right now where I have artists on staff, programmers on staff, or anything like that. It's I have friends that will contribute and they'll bounce things off of. My buddy Austin, he's in college right now. He's a much better programmer than I could ever think of being, but he's expressed interest in doing some composition work on it, and we'll see more of his stuff in chapter two. I really like what he's come up with.
Nice.
It's kind of it's a good mix between Super Nintendo to N64 kind of orchestral synthesis, which is what I initially wanted to do with the game, but I ended up having to go for royalty-free stuff. And I know one thing I have over here that I forgot to mention. So almost everything in there is by Kevin MacLeod. There was a package that he had before he went over to the new website, and they started nickel and diming you. There was a fee that he had. I want to say it was, I think it was around $80 or something like that. You could get his entire library in MP3 format, and you had, basically the same as royalty-free rights to use it.
Yeah.
So I went ahead and paid that and got it. And so that's why most of the stuff that you're going to hear in the game is going to be from him, with the exception of the title theme, which is a song called Monody by Fat Rat and Laura Brem. Great song. Love it. It's fantastic. And I was a little worried about that one because that one is open source. It's royalty free with attribution. The problem was that about a couple of weeks to a month ago, there was some dispute with some copyright issue. It wasn't coming from him. It was some other person used it, and there was someone else copyright claiming them. It wasn't even him.
Oh, yeah.
And so all his stuff on the website, the arcadium.net, got frozen. All the website with listings with this stuff was down. And he's like, we're working through this. I mean, I was sweating bullets because I'm like, dude, I've got trailers out there with this in there, all this. And I was freaking out. And then finally, probably about a week or so ago, he got it resolved. And so now it's back to no sweat, use it how you want as long as there's attribution. So it's a beautiful song. There's also a vocal part that Laura Brem does towards the end. And I feel that part suits the game as well. And it'll probably be in there sometime later on when we have more story unveiled.
Nice. Yeah, I remember that when we first started. I was like, "Wait a minute!" And then someone's like, "Hey, I've heard this before." Oh, hey, it's like Link, and then we're like, "Wait, oh my God, is this copyright? Is this drama that we need to like explore?" And it's like, "Oh
believe
no,
me,
wait,
I
it's
went
okay."
to extreme lengths. The sound effects that you heard in the game, I bought a license for the sound effects that I found.
Nice.
I bought a bulk one, and so that was one of the other reasons why I hesitated to go to charging anything, was because I didn't want to have to deal with anything legal in case something did come up. But I am very careful about what I use and whether it's copyrighted or not.
Yeah, I was the same way when I did the music for mine. The nice thing about Kevin MacLeod stuff is that you don't have to pay the royalty, like I said, nickel and dime. I would like to, but it's one of those things where, as long as I get the attribute like it says. But I would like eventually to have, custom music, more, unique sound effects, things like that. So it's a work in progress,
Absolutely.
It's always a work in progress. You always use, like, I feel like, even though I've only done one, every game is a stepping stone to bigger and better things. Now I know how to do this. Now I can expand and do other things. So, all right. Is there any other questions? Have I missed anything?
Did somebody ask me about future games?
Yes,
am I remembering that correctly?
Biker did ask, were there any projects like besides? I'm like I said, I was assuming besides Kedemara sequels and more chapters. Do you have any other games that you are keen to start developing?
So I have. I'll just go ahead and get this out there. I am a very big plan ahead person. The other thing is that having done D&D campaigns and having to world build for each of them, it's nice because I can translate some of those into worlds that I can just make for games. As far as a cast and major story arcs go, I don't necessarily have everything absolutely written out in terms of dialogue and everything. There's 4 more Kedemara games and a spinoff. And the Kedemara series. I also have another one that I'm kicking around doing, which is, it was going to be part of the story in Kedemara 1, and then I felt it would have been too jarring. So that should tell you something about it if I thought it was going to be too jarring for Kedemara 1. But I figured it would work better as sort of a side game or something along those lines. There's a point in the game where they are fighting somebody, the characters of Kedemara 1, and they get cast through this time warp. And instead of going back in time, they go forward in time. And Tessa comes up and announces it, of course. And so she's like, oh no, it's set in the 80s. So it's going to be all the characters in a parallel universe set in the 1980s. So that's an idea that I'm toying around with that's not the spinoff, but that's what I'm thinking as a side thing for Kedemara 1. As far as other stuff, really for me, if I had a team and I knew kind of what I had, I don't know. I might have to ask BG and see if anybody's up to the task of giving Deirdre purple streaks in her hair, or I don't know what on earth Tessa would have. I mean, it would be crazy.
Double dumbass to you too.
But that one's got a couple of interesting, unique ideas. There'll obviously be some nostalgia factor there, and it's interesting because that was actually based on another D&D campaign that I wanted to do, which was going to be set in the 80s, and it was originally going to be based on Cyberpunk 2020. And I kind of made a little mix of the rules from that for combat with D&D and made it less focused on combat. The players wanted to avoid that. And so that's cool little setting to use with the 80s. You know, most of the time you've got dungeons and caves and things like that. And I was like, well, for a tabletop RPG, we can go in abandoned malls and warehouses and, you know, shipyards and high schools, and that'll be fun. And that's a little bit different. So might do that. I have a lot of others. If I had more people, like if I had people that were interested in doing animating or doing art, or people that knew how to program at all, I would probably have a lot more things that I could point to and go, yeah, I'd like to do that. But for me, it's kind of like exponentially, my ideas get bigger and bigger. I'm hoping that by the time I get to Kedemara 3, I could make the move to 3D instead of you know, just doing that. Ideally, I'd like to have Kedemara 1 someday remade in Unity, or at least making the jump to Unity, or I don't think I'm brave enough to go into Unreal Engine, but Unity for Kedemara 2. So, yeah, and I mean, I've got other random ideas that I thought about. I thought about an RTS. I thought about what I guess a lot of people might call pejoratively a walking simulator. I had played a game called What Remains of Edith Finch, and I thought it was fantastic. I liked it. It was nice visually. The story was sad but compelling, and it was really well done. It was pretty unique. I liked that and wanted to tackle something similar to that someday. So the ideas are there, but the time and money aren't always there.
Yeah.
So
It's true. It's true. All right. Were there any other? Did I miss any other questions? Just say walking simulator. Did I miss any other questions or anything like that? Because I'm trying to keep an eye on chat and what's going on here. Hey, Cloud, how you doing, man? Okay, yeah, peachy. Okay. I'm trying to think if I have any other questions from what we played. Oh man, I should come better prepared.
it's fine, man. I mean,
oh man.
I can see the chat now, so
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Are the same characters going to be in my sequels? No. I have a very firm belief that some of the characters will resurface, but never as main party characters. Because most of the time, and this always irked me about other RPGs, you would start off and then you're kind of, you know, lowly person, and then you get to this just godlike level by the end of that one, and then you start having the same problem that they did with Dragon Ball Z. The most powerful being on Earth, and then it's got to be the universe, and then it has to be the most powerful being in the omniverse, and you just keep having to one up yourself in terms of what you're going on. Yeah. So
or you fall back on the my powers have been taken from me trope.
yes, exactly. And I mean, for ones where you're stuck with it being centered around one type of protagonist, I know my heart goes out to the people who make Metroid games, because that's I remember that happening in Metroid Prime, and you're like, what? Gotta go re-get my you know. And there's other good games where that's happened. That happened in Symphony of the Night, if I'm not mistaken, as well. But as far as an RPG goes, I like to make sure that players feel like they've achieved something and they don't get it taken from them. I noticed that was a real big theme with D&D. You never want to make people feel like they're not making progress. I mean, you can have setbacks, but you want to not make them feel like it was not worth it, or they're making huge mistakes and that it's their fault. If there is a setback, it needs to be out of their control. And you don't want to be punishing to the players. And I mean, there's some games that are like that. This is just my approach with it. But I like having a new cast of characters because it gives you a chance to do something fresh. And let's face it, there's a lot of times where you can get fatigue as a writer writing for the same characters. And me, that's definitely a reality. There would be some times where I would just kill a character off in a D&D campaign, and I'm like, oh, seriously, you guys still want this character around for real? Even though I liked them so much, and I would have options for them to pick different characters to accompany them in different sessions. And they're like, well, we want to go with that one. I'm like, are you sure you don't want to go with this one? No, we want that one. And I'm like, freaking great. All right, good. Yeah. There goes 3 hours of dialogue. So So there's number two. I don't want to leave any spoilers, but uh, it's got a very sweet premise. It's very uplifting. It's less focused on what's happened in the past, and that'll be more apparent in chapter 2 for Kedemara 1. There's a lot of the whole theme is Deirdre trying to figure out her past, and they're all trying to figure out the truth about what happened in the past. That's, I would say, is a huge theme in this one, and understanding that sometimes the information that you've been given as a child or that you procure early on in life may not be entirely correct. And that's something to keep in mind as you're playing through chapter 1 and 2, is that you might be hearing mostly truth or almost none. But now I forgot what the question was. I'm bad about doing that. I'm sorry. But
it's about the same characters in new sequels.
Oh, same characters. Yes.
So I had to scroll back a bit.
I won't throw this out. I won't throw out too much information, but Kedemara 2 happens a good bit of time after Kedemara 1 happens, and the main character in that one is Will from the Orphanage.
Oh. Thank you for that follow, Base Party. Appreciate it. Oh, somebody else from the Orphanage. Okay, that's cool.
Yep, the boy that you do the pirate fighting with in the tutorial. He's the main character. You could take a wild guess at what he's doing in his game.
Kia also asked romances. Okay, first of all,
that's a good one.
Okay, we love to ship and make waifu of legal characters. So, I forget what I was going to ask.
I can just jump in. I feel like it's probably awkward to phrase it for you.
As the creator, what is your take on pairing ups and whatnot? Do you have any planned? Are they going to be, if you do have any planned, are they a little bit more subversive? Like they're not going to be what you would think they would be, that sort of thing. Where do you see things heading, or are going to make them head? You don't have to give spoilers, but we're all dying to know.
Oh, I can. It's so funny because so much of this goes right back to all the playtesting. Because I had a questionnaire that was, I'm not even kidding, 10 pages long. Oh, wow. For my playtesters, and I mean they were such good friends. Getting through that, and one of them was he had a bachelor's in English. He was an English major, and he also had a graduate's degree in library science. Really, really good friend of mine, great guy, and he went over it and filled out every single question.
Wow.
And had some very compelling feedback on a couple of things. I talked about, different character pairings and things like that as far as relationships go. And he would leave suggestions like, do you really think it's the right time to bring something like that up? I was like, wow, it's like I'm getting graded on my own questionnaire.
Nice.
Do you want a red pen to go along with that? So he was saying that the question initially was, who would you think would be a good love interest for Caleb? Now, our only options in that particular question was Deirdre or Amy. And that was what he replied to that with. I will say that after he told me that, I have thought a great deal about it. Without giving away any spoilers, I can tell you a couple of things. One that is a pet peeve of mine that will not be happening. There is no Deirdre in a wedding dress as the ending for Kedemara 1. I can guarantee you of that. There's no, that's the pinnacle of her journey, is getting the ring. That's not it. I can guarantee that. For the most part, and honestly, it's because Deirdre's story is so much more about friendship than it is about dating and things like that. Is there romance? I mean, they're young adults. There's going to be feelings. There's going to be flirting. There's going to be other people that come along. I don't know how many people picked up on this because it was a pretty subtle scene. Therese has a thing for Caleb. She admires him a whole lot, and so she's a possible love interest for Caleb. We all know Caleb loves Amy or has feelings for Amy. It is not reciprocated. this one, just because it's brutally apparent once you play chapter 2 and it's not really strung along. Amy and Lucius become a thing. So they're appearing officially in the game. So, and the reason why is because there's a future character in a later Kedemara game that is Amy and Lucius's progeny. So that has to be in place for that to occur. As far as Deirdre and Caleb goes, they don't hate each other by the end of Kedemara 1. They are not married by the end of Kedemara 1. I will just leave it by saying it is the proper ending for Kedemara 1. Now, where things go from there, we will see. But it is the proper way to end Kedemara 1, and I'll stand by that. Tessa's too young, so don't anybody even think about it. She is a little girl, and she is just out to have fun, and yeah. We're going to leave it at that. Just going to leave it at
idea.
that.
Good idea.
So,
okay.
She's in love with adventure and scaring people. So,
Tessa's our daughter.
You know, it's funny that you say that, because there's a whole lot of people that said, you know, if you had a kid, it would probably be just like, if you had a daughter, she'd be just like Tessa. And that was like months after I wrote her, and I'm like, yeah, they're right.
Oh my God.
She probably would. Yes. Gratuitous head pats. Yes. Right on there. But yeah, one thing, if anybody doesn't have anything else.
Looks like Cloud just asked, what did you think of me playing your game?
What do you mean exactly?
Did you mean like what was going through his mind as I was playing his game? Or like what do you like? Do you want to clarify a little bit, Cloud? That silence as you wait for chat to catch up to what you just said.
Yeah, random number generator fails.
That's just me, and always though, Azir. That's just me every time. I am nothing but.
Another has risen to join the flock.
Damien, thank you very much for that gift sub. I appreciate that. Thank you, man. I reckon, how did Andrew feel when?
Well, I will say this: while I was watching it, anybody, okay.
You play your game and he likes it, and what do you think of it?
What do I think about my game?
Or what do you mean, like, what does he think about me liking his game, Cloud? I can translate Cloud.
I reckon.
Okay, so what do you think about me liking your game?
I'm pleased as punch that anybody likes it. Honestly, it sounds a little weird, I know, and maybe I sound like I'm being phony, but with my job, I run into a whole lot of. I work in a professional office environment as an IT engineer, and so when I bring this up with some of my friends, they're business people for the most part, and so they're like, "So when are you going to be monetizing this?" And so what are you looking for in terms of return on investment? I mean, just throwing out these terms, and I'm like, I know what they are, but I don't think about them in my sleep or dream about them.
Yeah.
And I'll tell them, I just want people to have fun. I'm trying to take the D&D experience and place it into a game. And I'll be totally honest. One of the things that made me feel comfortable enough to reach out was everyone's kind of reaction as we were going through here. Anyone's going to be uptight and kind of scared with someone, that they don't know, experiencing something that they created, and so kind of near and dear to them. And like I said before, the criticism that I had received, I wouldn't even call it criticism, I'd call it advice. The advice that I kind of received from everybody in the stream and from you was all totally fair. It was great. There was a couple of people that were kind of late to the party, and so they didn't really have context, but I think anybody that was there from the beginning seemed to have really good advice on things that really did need changing. But I mean, quite honestly, I just want everyone to enjoy the game and have fun. I had somebody just the other day ask me at work, well, hey, what's your goal? What's your dream? Like, if you sky's the limit, what would make you happy? What would make you feel like you're completed with this game? And I'm going to sound kind of weird when I say this, but I could die a happy man if I'm walking in Target or Walmart or someplace like that, and it's Halloween time, and I'm strolling through the aisles, and on the aisle over, I hear a little girl complaining to her mom that they don't have the Tessa costume for Halloween that she wants. And I get to walk over there and tell her, "Hon, whichever Tessa costume that you want, you let me know and I'll get it for you."
That's
And
cute.
that's that would make, because that's the thing. I mean, if I could have, I just have a soft spot for kids. I love kids. I don't have any of my own, but I'm an honorary uncle to several kids and love them to death. And so being able to connect with them on that, and kids just have no filter. They're
Yes.
totally honest.
They
And if
are.
you can get through to them and have something that they connect with and they like, then that's really, really super meaningful for me. That would make me happy. I mean, don't get me wrong. It'd be great to go to a convention and have a Q&A panel and, have people dissect my story and my, literary brain and tell me what I was trying to do with this and that. And I can just, kindly nod and smile and say thank you. But, just having the kid run up and tell me that they loved my game that's enough for me. I appreciate all, compliments or all goodwill from people, not just from kids, but it's, to be honest, that's what makes me the happiest. I just want people to have fun.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good goal. There's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with like releasing it out there for nothing, for free, because you wanted to get out there and you want to have people to have fun. I think not it, like some people mention in chat. Not everything needs to be monetized, and I agree with that. I've monetized my game, but that's just I'm a greedy son of a bitch. So.
Well, I mean,
but
I'd imagine what you're doing a whole lot more than I do. So there's some expertise and justification in that is definitely comes into play. I will say this though, and I hope this doesn't get misconstrued the wrong way. Like somebody will probably dig this up 5 years from now if it ever goes anywhere. If I needed money, what I would rather do is if I get all of Kedemara 1 done and things like that, if it came to Kedemara 2 and I wanted to push to have a team of people that were helping me with it, and I felt like I just couldn't tell the story effectively without something more than I could have from the RPG maker or just the current assets that I have on hand. At that point, I would probably try to start a Kickstarter or a GoFundMe and just be as transparent as I could be and say, look, guys, if you would like to have this game made, this is what it's going to cost me. And, they did a similar thing with Skullgirls, and just being upfront and posting how much exactly that I need to get it made, and just saying, if you guys would like to do this, show your support. If you don't have any interest, that's fine. That would be one of the reasons why I would prefer to keep the first one free. I can, and I would like to build an audience so that if we did want to try something bigger later on down the line, that would be more likely a possibility. The other thing is I'm also much more interested in having memorabilia for the game as opposed to just charging for the game. Y'all are about to see just how ridiculous and silly I am. So one of my ideas that I have for a t-shirt that I just hope to God gets made, I might just be the only person going around wearing it. I would like to get one with Mr. Kitty's portrait on the shirt. And he's wearing sunglasses and a backwards hat. And below it, it says Boxstar. Yes. So that would be, that's my first t-shirt idea. So that would be one. Another thing would be art prints. I'm still talking with Leo Fonseca, the guy who did Deirdre's art for the title screen, about selling some art prints of that. He's a bit busy with 3 different projects right now, so that art prints would be another good way to give people something to look at and remember the game by. And those don't have to be very expensive, and they're easy to ship. Pie in the sky. Figurines like they have for different anime for the characters would also be something that's fantastic. I have a couple for shows I like myself, and that would be something that's really, really neat. Basically just and that way, even after you finish the game, you kind of have something to remember it by, and you have something that's hopefully useful. I mean, a shirt will keep you warm, so that's where I'm looking at with that. So Dakimakura. I know what that is, Cloud. I'll put it this way. There's certain things that I'm gonna leave up to the community on whether or not they want to create. There will be officially licensed things, and there will be fan created things. But that's
Where did it go? Damien. Okay, just to kind of interject here real quick. Damien did ask a question. What part of your story was the toughest to draft and create? He's asking because he's also a writer at heart, and I also want to kind of tack on to that. You said you enjoy planning a lot. Was this you planned the entire story out, or was it one of those where you kind of did it as you went?
So this one I planned out the least compared to all my other ones. I would be jumping into Kedemara 2, 3, 4, and 5. 3 was actually what I was going to start with, and then decided no, for various reasons, I needed to go back. That one would really need to be 3D. The reason why is because a lot of the story elements that are in that one are way more serious than Kedemara 1. And writing for text only is incredibly difficult. One, because no one, unless they are the writer themselves or they've spoken with the person who wrote them, can know where the head of the character is at as far as what they're thinking, how they would sound like. One that I get asked a whole lot after people read it is, well, what do they sound like in your head? And it's funny because I had to think that up and research that this week. You'd think I wouldn't, but I had to find some analogs for the characters. I'll answer that after I answer his questions because I don't want to get off too far off. But the hardest one for me to write, believe it or not, and it probably showed in how many mistakes I made, was the Cassian Oasis, the Dune Sea, and the Cassian Encampment with the Sandworm. That's the part towards the end. Without getting too much into my personal life, I was having some health issues going on, and it was very hard for me to sit down and focus or even just sit for long periods of time. And it got to the point where there was a lot of things where I just went, close enough. It's whatever. The pop-ins, I look back on that now, and yeah, pretty shameful. And some of the stuff where I just went, that's what I did before. I was too lazy to do a character transfer. I was like, well, whatever. They need to be standing here for it so that they don't get clipped into another character or something like that, and gone back and changed all those, by the way. It was good if it was valid criticism, totally valid. But that was the part where I felt the most, it was the most difficult to get through that part. And now everyone's going to go back and they're going to see that, but play the part that I fixed now, please. I just uploaded it today. And then there was a real rut that I had because I wasn't quite sure what to do when it came to chapter 2, and then I knew what needed to happen next, but it was just getting over that hump for it and making that cut over to it. And things improved after a while. Again, won't get into the weeds on that, but made some really positive changes for myself, and I'm doing a lot better in terms of health and things like that. And good. It shows a lot in chapter 2. You're going to be like, is this the same person? Quite honestly, chapter 2 is so much better than chapter 1. It just is. I tried to improve it some. Some of the content that's in chapter 1 early on in Longdale wasn't there before you guys played it. The smithy, the inn, the secret room, which you guys didn't get to yet in chapter 1, and Longdale, the tea house, which I don't think y'all got to that in the stream, the stables, and the item shop. All of those got added in later. Initially, it was just the orphanage, Madame Ava's tent, and the warehouse and tavern, and that was it. And Caleb wasn't even in the tavern, and so there was a couple of other things that I got some mixed information on, such as,
I'm sorry. I'm just.
I just saw the one about the sheets.
Oh, God, I'm sorry.
I think it's.
You guys are terrible. I swear to God. Okay, can you please just answer? Do you sleep on?
Let me
bed?
put it this way: when I
I
tested to put that baby to rest, when I was testing my webcam this morning, and I was like, my bed sheets are going to be in the shot. I washed them today. So I washed them, and I neatly made my bed, which I never do because I would like to keep up appearances. So that would be, yes,
this is all about
you got
sheets.
insider information about the developer of Kedemara's sheet habits. And okay. I sleep with a comforter. No regular sheet. But so I'm sorry, but back to what I was saying about
Yes.
that. I forget what I was saying. Stuff in town. So I added a lot in town. I got some mixed information because some people said it's too confusing to know where to go. Back when it was just those few things, and some people said, "Golly, there's nothing to do in the town." And so I was kind of tossed up between make it immersive and a lot to do, and make it simple and easy to find out what you needed to do. So I have it set up in town where you can ask almost anybody, "Where's the warehouse at?" And then once you see that it needs a key, you can ask everyone in town, who has the key to the warehouse, and you get different answers from different people. And one of the things this was another thing where seeing y'all play really gave me some good design insight. When you talk to the old man at first, it doesn't cut over into his extra dialogue because he has another set of text responses that you can have for him. And the first one you can ask him is, "Where's the warehouse?" And Deirdre just says, "Hey, can you tell me where to find the warehouse east of here?" And he says, "Have you tried going east?" ... from Deirdre. And so, with her face. So now I have it set where it automatically goes to that afterwards. But yeah, so I'm sorry. So again, got off on that. But yeah, hardest part, definitely the Cassian area. And you'll see more about those guys, the Cassian Rebels. They actually play a really big part in Chapter 3. So they're a really, really interesting group, and you'll definitely see them again.
Okay, and then people were asking about okay, are those bass or are they guitars?
Bass guitars, and
Okay.
2 guitars that are over there. I play bass guitar predominantly. Music I finally gave up on by age 29, and then
that sounds so sad.
I was trying since 17, and
wow.
yeah, I got some places. It's one of those situations where the more people that you add on exponentially, the harder it is to coordinate something and keep it going. And so I had gone through different types of music. The last one that I really gave a shot to was doing surf indie. Liked that a whole lot. The guitar tones that they used for that were pretty cool. But yeah, bass guitar is what I started playing when I was about 17. Played guitar when I was 16. Settled on bass and played for a while. I still pick around every now and then. As you can tell, I've spent more than a few dollars on bass equipment, just a few. But yeah, so now my focus is game design.
We all have our vices. Anyway, yes, that was me showing Bowsette in the background. Anyway,
like that, by the way.
Yeah. My wife's actually the one that found that for me, so I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. So.
She's a keeper.
Okay, if I wasn't, would you guys actually be watching me if I wasn't?
Do I not have anime stuff in my room?
Yeah, actually, your walls are surprisingly bare.
I live in an apartment, and I've moved from so many apartments that I know better than to put things up there that I don't want to damage or other things along those lines. So I usually keep it minimal, and I always keep my sheets sparkling white all the time.
I just want to know what that big black thing. It's a curtain. It's a fucking curtain.
It's a curtain. Yes. I'm trying to introduce negative space into the room. No, it keeps out the sunlight. I'm sorry. I guess I'm one of those like the part where Tessa's talking about Oji-san Kenobi and Deirdre's like, "How did you know that? Mystical secrets." Actually, he was just waving to me through the door. I do that all the time. I wish I could have fantastic stories about certain things, but it's usually something very utilitarian.
Gucci over your Oxy. Anyway, do you want to tell us anything about your plans for Chapter 2? Unless anyone has any other questions or things they want to bring up about.
One thing I did want to follow up with. So I forgot it, but I have it over here in my notes. So one question, and I did get this from people that were playtesting the game, and they were asking, what voices do you hear the characters in?
Oh, yes.
And so Deirdre is interesting. You can't really convey this very easily with the artwork for the game. Deirdre is about 5'9", 5'10". So she's a tall gal, and so whenever I'm hearing her talking, I'm hearing Donna from that '70s show. Or
Oh,
if you want to
God.
go for an anime reference, Ryuko from Kill la Kill would be the English dub of her would be another good analog for kind of how Deirdre would sound in my head when I'm reading for her. If I had to pick, if I went with accents, I guess a deeper version of Merida from Brave would be if I wanted to go for a Scottish
Oh, yeah.
accent or
Yeah,
something
I can
along
hear
those
that.
lines. Caleb is Caleb's a tough one. I had to think about that a lot this week because the closest thing I could think of would be maybe a less high pitched version of Goku from Dragon Ball Z Abridged. Just because his cadence and how goofball he is with his delivery is pretty much exactly the way Caleb would say something. So him from DBZ Abridged would be Goku from DBZ Abridged would probably be about what Caleb would be. Amy was a tough one. I initially was gonna push for her having an Irish accent from the get-go. If I went with something that wasn't quite so ethnic, I'd say maybe a less grammatically stiff version of Starfire from Teen Titans would probably be a good way. Amy's meant to be a real perky kind of, bubbly character, and so she's almost not quite squeaky, but she's kind of like there without hitting the ceiling on the perky squeakiness. She's if to use an anime term, she's supposed to be the moe character, and she kind of feels that in a almost parody sort of way, but almost all the characters are parodies of different things. Tessa's a hard one to figure out as far as a voice goes. I'm sure unless I'm sure I could put her in front of Tara Strong, and she could probably come up with something great for her. Tessa's obviously about the equivalent of a 10 or 11-year-old girl. So she's definitely got a youthful voice. Maybe Riku from Final Fantasy X, maybe a younger version of her would probably be what I was thinking with that. But it's kind of hard to tell with some of the characters because you don't really have a size frame of reference. Because like Deirdre's 5'9", 5'10", Caleb's 6'4", and Amy's like 5'3", and of course Tessa's the shortest out of all of them since she's developmentally the youngest, not chronologically the youngest. So chronologically, she beats everybody out for now.
For now. Oh, God. All right. So what are your plans? Like, where do you have you begun work on chapter 2 already?
I have about three. I have about 3 hours or so of content in chapter 2. Okay. That's I would say probably in a playable, presentable state.
Oh, wow.
I know I said I was going to have a video of content. I will admit I didn't feel like I could do it justice without what's the word I'm looking for? Since the game is so linear and it plays so much on absolutely everything, it's kind of hard to pick things out that aren't going to be spoilers for the game. But a couple things that I did post in the major update that I made on Steam, I had an announcement that I did on there about a month or so ago, I think. So a couple of things. Ultimas are coming. So Ultimas would be like overdrives, limit breaks from Final Fantasy. There's like that. So with Amy and Tessa, they use TP for Ultimas, and Caleb and Deirdre use TP for Ultimas as well. And so they'll be like, big, flamboyant, powerful attacks and things like that. And so those are going to be coming in chapter 2. There's 2 more characters that are coming in chapter 2 as well. And so one of the things that I got overwhelming feedback from my playtesters on, and I didn't realize it was going to be as big of a problem. They're like, is this going to be all female characters in the game? Aside from Caleb. And I was like, yeah, I kind of didn't want people to get the whole Caleb harem vibe.
Oh, God.
So there's going to be 2 more characters in chapter 2, both of which are going to be guys. One of them was planned to be a guy anyways. And then there's another one that was I wouldn't say he's a very good character. He brings a lot more balance to the story than there was prior. He brings a little bit more of a serious element to the story as well. I mean, with any of the characters in chapter 1 and just the tone of it in general, I wanted to start off and set the precedent that you can't take the game too seriously. The story itself, like the overall story arc for Deirdre, is very serious, and that becomes much more apparent as the game goes on. However, the in-between stuff, the comic relief, is the part that kind of helps you get through some of the heavy stuff. And there's a lot more heavy stuff that comes up in chapter 2. I know there was some, man, is there a fourth wall left? There was some comments like that, and yes, fair enough. Not to seem manipulative, that was a bit of the intent with chapter 1, because I wanted to go, if that's enough to steer somebody away, they're probably not going to like how experimental that I get with things later on. The story does get more serious, and you're still going to have plenty of comedy. It's meant to be. By the time you get to chapter 4, there's going to be, you're going to need a box of tissues. It's a good ending. It's a very, very emotional one. But the game does take a more serious turn in chapter 2. You start getting more character development that's less on the caricature aspect of characters, because when you first introduce them, you want to make the characters bigger than they really are. You want to turn the volume up to 11 on their personalities so that they're memorable, and you kind of know, well, that's their shtick. Because otherwise, if it's too subtle, you really don't get a good feel for the character and their voice. If Tessa was the way she is in chapter 3, in chapter 1, you're kind of not really going to get that she's a fun-loving trickster and other things like that. So that the tone for chapter 2 is going to change. I think it was 2 more characters, Ultimas. Here's the other thing, and this is a totally fair assessment. I use original not tile sets, but maps more often in chapter 2. It's a very fair assessment and a very fair observation. To be completely and totally honest, I was still kind of finding my way. I'm not going to say that the ones in chapter 2 are great or good. They're better than the ones I made before in chapter 1. But needless to say, there should be improved some. More of Austin's music is going to be in there. He's got about 2 tracks so far that I'm really excited about. That I think are just perfect for it. They sum up the places that you're going to be at, and they're great. Trying to think of what else from chapter 2.
Do you want to talk about the new characters you're going to introduce at all? Or
yeah, somebody just asked if what do they like. So I did state that both of them, the ones that are coming in this one, are guys. Without giving too many spoilers away, the first new party member that you run into in chapter 2, he kind of fills a bit more of a mentor and advisor role to Deirdre in the party. She has a bit of a connection on he's much older. Developmentally, he's the oldest in the party. We find out a little bit about his past. His past is a very mysterious thing. You find out more about it as you go along. He's a good character as far as being there for emotional support. And one of the other things is that Deirdre not really having, she had Granny Moira as a good, maternal figure when she was younger, and she cared for the kids and things like that. And so a hole for her character would be having, a father figure, maybe not necessarily a father figure, but a character to kind of, I guess, sort of like a role model that happens to also be a guy. She has role models that are females that she had developmentally earlier on. Yeah, a male mentor. That would be a good way to put it. Biker Panda. He's an interesting character. He's a bit more serious, and he has a bit more of a emotionally compelling introduction to the characters. It's the tone is a little bit different than how you came across, say, Tessa, for sure. So he's a very good character, though. He'll come off a little jaded at first. By the end, you're gonna want to give him all the hugs. He's a good guy. He's a good advisor. Kind of what Deirdre needs at that point in the story. The next character is Next character is a very interesting one. He's another elf. However, he happens to be a wood elf, or as they're derogatorily referred to by some in the story, savage or wild elves. He doesn't like that title very much. Without going too much into the history of the wood elves and the difference between Tessa's folks, the high elves, there was an ideological split between these two groups of elves, and wood elves don't really care much for high elves. He ends up joining the party. I'll leave the explanation to whenever you get to chapter 2. He also has a very interesting little quirk to his character. I say his. Everyone mistakes Corin, that's his name, for a girl. He's a little bit older than Tessa would be, so he's about the equivalent of an 11 or 12-year-old boy, and he has the most beautiful long red hair.
Oh my
because not precisely, Panda.
oh no. Oh, Panda.
He's he will vehemently deny that he is a girl, and he's a boy. But there's comical there's comical elements to just give an example. There's many situations where they are in a dire situation they need to escape from, and sometimes the only solution to that situation is Corin dressing up like a girl, and he's just like, freaking crap. So he
wow.
So to give you another idea, I'm excited about Corin because he's pretty funny, and by that point in chapter 2, you need some comic relief, some fresh comic relief. Here's another T-shirt idea. There was going to be a T-shirt that's got Deirdre, Tessa, Amy, and Corin on it, and it was going to say, "Girls just want to have fun," and he's going to be looking very sullen and angry on the graphic of that T-shirt while they're all looking happy. But he often gets put in situations where he has to pose as a girl to get them out of trouble, much to his dismay. But he's a good character. He's a heartwarming character, and he's very fun. He's a good comic relief character. There's some funniness to the other character that I was talking about. His name is Gerwolf. He's a good character as well. There's some comedy to him as well, but he tends to veer a little more on the, on the serious side.
Oh Lord.
The little brother of the crew. I guess so. I guess you could put it that way. I think people won't draw a smut of. Well, like I said, that's up to them. I would hope that people wouldn't do things
Lord,
that.
No.
Oh, I'll put it this way. I would hope, and it's a free internet out there.
Oh,
I just wouldn't want people. I wouldn't want innocent kids going and drawing or looking for pictures of Tessa or Corin on the internet and running across bad stuff. So, yeah. To bare my soul a little bit, I'll tell you where the inspiration for that comes from. When I was younger, I had long hair when I was a teenager, and continually got mistaken for a girl from behind. This was before I could grow facial hair, which didn't happen until I was 19.
No.
So Corin is born of a personal frustration of mine that I can look back on and laugh at now. So.
Wow. Yeah.
If I was walking in front,
if
I was walking in front of people in public, my hair was down to my shoulders, and I have a very, I had, and I probably still do have a very narrow frame. So when people would see me walking in front of them, and they would ask me, "Excuse me, miss," and I'm sitting here going, "Who in the world are they talking to?" And then they're, "I'm sorry," and I'm like, and just kept walking. Yes, that's
Oh no.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing. You just gotta learn to laugh at things. You gotta be able to not take yourself too seriously and just go, this is funny, and just laugh at it. So, yeah. Okay. And it makes for some comedic stuff, but yeah.
Oh man.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, Beachy, what the hell? That's
for Chewy.
What is wrong with you guys? I swear to God. So why so many blondes?
Why are there so many blondes in the game? Kia, that's actually a really, really good question. So this is one of those questions that I can answer partially, because it does give away some story elements. I will say this, that a lot of it has to do with the regions that the characters are actually from. So Caleb's a redhead. You'll kind of get this as established later on in chapter 2 when you run into other people that are from the Highlands. Most of them have red hair as well. Tessa's a high elf. Pretty much all high elves have blonde hair. Corin being a wood elf. Wood elves have red hair. Yeah. Now, Amy, like Amy was, since she was a character that I had from D&D before, I ended up just having that like screwed into my head, just drilled into my head that she had to be a blonde. So that was just how I saw Amy in my head, and I could write for her much more easily when she looked like the one that I had from D&D. Deirdre has a reason for being blonde. And there's a reason why a lot of the people that you run into in town and places like that are typically not blonde. I'm going to leave it at that. But there is some thought behind that. That might not get figured out or explained until chapter 3. But an elf with a Texas accent. No, Deirdre's not a goddess. She's not. Yeah.
They all dye their hair.
Yeah, I played chapter 2. I hate to give that answer, BG. I really do, but it's if I give too much away, like one thing I did want to note, and this is one thing that I never get tired of, is the shock and awe of people whenever they finish Rainwood Forest and they find out that the monster was Tessa all along. That never, ever, ever gets old for me. Practically everyone that's played it, no one has guessed that Tessa was the monster. And so there's some little things like that that are going to appear in the game that I don't really want to give too much away on and have run the surprise for people, because that's usually that little moment of shock and that little moment of no way is usually enjoyable for people and super enjoyable for me. Secretly a Super Saiyan.
Oh my god.
It'd probably be sending up straight if it was, but no. Unfortunately, there's no
Um,
Super Saiyans in Kedemara, not in Etheria.
Oh my god. Using Tessa as your tutorial speaker or whatnot, what was the decision behind that? Well, I was playing it in after the fact, it made a little bit more sense. Okay, as she was just basically your mouthpiece for getting across different concepts or things that you're doing in the game.
Right.
Why pick her? Because she was also inside the game. So at the time it seemed a little confusing to me, but as we played a little bit further, okay, this is like a first RPG, it's an introduction thing, so okay, this character is basically, is it just because people identified with her so well, or was it that way from the beginning?
Tessa started off as the person giving tips initially. From the get-go. I think when I first started making the game, I didn't have anybody narrating or giving explanations on things to do, and assumed, because I played games ever since I was a kid, and I played RPGs, and I thought to myself, like, oh, people will be able to figure this out, like, it's not that difficult. And I had some people that were having a hard time, and so especially since I was wanting to have a broad appeal age-wise and to an audience or things like that, then it seemed like I kind of need something with a little more detailed explanation. And at first I was kind of bitter about having to do that. I felt like it was a waste of time. And then I remembered when I was a kid and I rented Super Mario RPG for the first time as a kid, and I wanted to play the game from the get-go. And I'm going to sound like like an idiot when I say this. I was pretty young when it came out and I rented it, but I didn't realize when you first start the game that you have to go back and look at that castle after you get launched out of there for the game to keep going. I didn't know.
Oh,
so
God,
I was stuck, and I didn't know how to progress.
I remember that part.
Yes, and so there's somebody that had beat the game before, and they'd already cleared through all the story. And so the closest thing I could do was go back and just go to the different areas and fight, random monsters and things like that. I missed the entire story as a kid. Would have absolutely loved it. And
Wow.
I thought to myself, when I was getting frustrated making the tutorial information, and maybe this sounds like me being a little bit pretentious or things like that, but, I wouldn't want somebody to just hang up the game or not play it simply
Yeah.
because of one of those situations. Whenever all it would have taken was somebody put in a text box that says,
By the
for
way.
Mario going, I wonder if I should go back and look at the castle again. And then I would have been able to experience that entire game as a kid instead of as
Wow.
somebody who's 19 or 20.
Yeah,
So
wow.
that was, but as far as Tessa going, Tessa was a character that a lot of people kind of gravitated towards and kind of liked. The other thing is that, and here I'm going to get a little pretentious for a little bit. So Tessa is also kind of an avatar for childhood potential. Kids are unlimited potential when you think about it. They're nothing but it. Um, nobody kind of knows their limitations. Kids don't always know their limits. Sometimes they can do amazing things. When you see kids that are like 4 years old playing, Bach or Beethoven on a piano, they're barely able to reach the keys, and I'm over here like, I'm playing chopsticks, and I'm past 30. And it just seems like there's such a blank slate with kids, and you think, on a macro scale, Tessa's been a kid for 82 years as far as in the story, and what could you accomplish with that much time as being potential and growing and learning and things like that. So she kind of embodies not playing by the rules all the time, and maybe not knowing just how you get the idea that she doesn't even necessarily understand exactly how proficient she is. Just the same as Amy doesn't realize how attractive that she is. Tessa doesn't, she's just being herself. She's not really measuring herself against other people. She does what she does, and she wants to make friends, and she wants to, get along and have a good time and things like that because she's a kid. She's not as, self-conscious as we are as adults or even as teenagers. Because you make that crossover to 13 or 14 years old, and all of a sudden you care about what socks that you're pairing with your shoes. Whereas a kid, you don't even care if you're wearing socks, or if your shirts match or things along those lines. And so that's one of the other elements to Tessa's character, is that she's carefree, and so if that means breaking the rules of the game, or let's say suspension of reality, or breaking the stuff like that, she's fine with doing it. And so that just seemed to be the best suited for her. She seemed to be the character best suited for that, which is why it was random at first, and then it stuck because of that.
Interesting. Okay. Cool. That was my main question. I was just kind of curious which came first, the Tess or the chicken.
Well, I mean, Tessa did first.
Yeah.
In the tutorial, like I said, I wanted to use a cat, and then ended up using the chicken because it had a more stern face, and just left it being Mr. Kitty. And one of the questions that I had on my questionnaire was asking them, the playtesters, do you want to know why Tessa calls him Mr. Kitty? And my friend that had the master's in library science and the bachelor's in English, phrased it. He's such a good writer. Phrased it better than I could ever. He said any explanation would be anticlimactic compared to keeping it a mystery.
Yeah.
And that basically summed it up for me. It's like book closed, So I'm sorry to admit that now, but we'll never know why Tessa calls him Mr. Kitty McFloofykins. It's just what she calls him.
What questions are you just saying you have questions to be funny, or do you actually have questions, Kia?
Is it questions about my sanity or the game?
I have several questions. Kids are weird. Yeah, that's very true. That is very, very true.
A kid for 80 plus. How is she a kid for 80 plus years now? Oh, she's a high elf, and they borrowing from the D&D lore, they age at a much slower rate than humans do, and so well, that was a good one that was up there about why she was that age. So high elves typically tend to live around 700 to 800 years. Oh gosh. Wow, it is really hard not to bring up stuff from chapter 2 that would be let me put it this way. In the grand scheme of things in the kingdom, well, y'all knew about this because you saw the Heaven's Ward. you saw the Heaven's Ward cinematic whenever Amy was describing it. So the man that was in the middle, that was in the kingly looking clothes, that was walking forward into Heaven's Ward in the Citadel after Solus and Liara had left. He was the first true king that they had, and that was the stead that was given to humans, was to rule over government, productivity, and things like that. Now, the people that were to his left and his right in that cinematic, standing next to him, facing towards Heaven's Ward, was Tessa's grandfather and her grandmother. The elves have a different role in the grand scheme of things as opposed to the humans. And so I don't think it's really too much of something that'll kill the story. Elves have a role as keepers of lore for the most part. And given their very long lives, living for 700 to 800 years, it would seem suited to them to do that. And so that's one of the reasons why they live as long as they do. So that doesn't give too much away, but that's, one of the reasons why. They're historians, basically, and usually the best at it.
Cool. Are there any other fantasy races in the game?
I'm gonna have to get meta for a little while,
Okay.
because initially I wanted to bring in a lot of the races that I had created in D&D, or should I say introduced in my campaigns. I had explanations for how each of them came to be in my D&D campaigns, and there was a few that I just couldn't find compelling enough character models for out of the RPG Maker assets that were available. One of which, I'll give this as an example that came up in Chapter 1 where something had to go a different way. The Cassian rebels were initially supposed to be Middle Eastern and not Pan-Asian. And so that I couldn't find any I couldn't find the volume of character artwork that I needed in order to pad that out. But there was another character pack for kind of the ones that you saw in the Cassian encampment, and so I kind of had to switch it over to that. It's fine because that makes it a bit. It puts me out of the storyline that was in my D&D campaign. It makes me think a bit more, and I can actually kind of get my mind freed up to shape it a different way. But I initially wanted Dragonkin. I wanted orcs, proper orcs, not the pig orcs. I wanted Blizzard orcs, which now I better look into orcs because, golly, if I was wrong on frostworms, I better do my research on orcs as well. So
no, their orcs are acceptable.
Yes.
According to my research, they're acceptable.
But as for some ones that were a little bit more common, dwarves was one that I wanted to introduce, and I just haven't found anything that I thought did it justice out of the assets that I've run across. Same thing with halflings or gnomes.
Yes, whatever you do, don't use VX Ace tiles or sprites for dwarves or children in the game. I'm just gonna tell you that one dev to another.
Look, let me explain. The ship was budget cuts.
Okay,
that's the only reason why that happened. But that was
the ship. I forgot about the ship. Okay.
Yeah. So I have to
ask, what inspired that scene? Was it just was it because you couldn't find a good ship tile set? So you're like, okay, I'm just gonna do this, and I'm gonna just play it off as a gag.
It was half because there was Medieval High Seas had a tile set and graphics that were beautiful, photorealistic ones, and they had a ship one, a High Seas one that was actually very good looking, and they had it for a pretty reasonable price. So I snagged that, and I thought to myself, I was like, this doesn't match the rest of it. So, and I saw the other one for Time Fantasy as well, and I ended up buying that as well. And I thought to myself, okay, so if I need a ship, because they didn't really have anything that was dead on the same as the RPG Maker MV tile set or the art style that fit with it. And I attempted to make one out of random stuff that was in the tile set. And my sister was the most tactful she could be in telling me that it did not look anything like a ship, and then wanted to know how much sleep I was getting whenever I made that selection. So I had either the very, very nice looking medieval high seas one to use, or the Time Fantasy one that was a bit more retro style, a little bit, more blocky pixels. And so given that conundrum, I said, are people going to think I have too much money if I get the medieval high seas one? And I didn't want to give that impression because that's certainly not the truth.
I'm loaded.
Didn't really have money to burn. So I put that one in there and I thought maybe the characters won't stand out that much. Maybe nobody will notice. By the time I'm done putting the ship in there, I'm like, oh no. This is like firing off a flare gun. It is brutally obvious that this is different. So I decided to make a joke out of it, and I was like, because one of the things, and I noticed this a few times with questions that you had during the stream. With D&D, and when you're DMing, you have to think ahead of the players a lot of times because you don't want to get caught off guard, either be it on lore or something along those lines, because you don't want to get deer in the headlights whenever they ask an NPC a question or something else like that. You always want to have something on tap. And so part of doing that effectively is being able to kind of think, well, what's the player probably thinking? And so having to do that for 4 or 5 people at a time, when I only have to do it for one person who's playing the game and I can shape the experience so much more, it's a lot easier to do that. So I'm sitting here thinking anybody with 20/20 vision, anybody with 20/40 vision is going to look at this and go, what the hell's going on here? And so I'm like, before you go anywhere, that's why it happens as soon as you get to that map. Tessa's like, hey guys, sorry, Mr. Developer had to make some budget cuts, so it was this or live on Glop Tarts and Mountain Drool, which of course is supposed to be Pop Tarts and Mountain Dew that won't get me sued, which at the time I was living on. So we wonder why I had health issues. You'll wonder. It was Taco Bell was peppered in then as well, but for the most part, that was kind of the way it went. And so playing it off as a bit of a joke and kind of making lemonade out of lemons was the approach that I went with that. And I'm sorry if you guys hear noise in the background. There's a parking garage right outside my window, and they like to rev up before they go anywhere.
Oh, lovely.
So so in terms of that was the idea. There was, instead of kind of sticking my head down in shame, I'm like, we'll just make a joke out of it.
Because I remember that, like, initially when I first saw it, I was like, oh god, wait, what? I was like, this doesn't match up. And then, oh wait, there's the explanation.
Yeah, like when and I usually try to get it as soon as I can. And it's really helpful with my playtesters because whenever they would have a question, that was helpful because when it would come up, I could go, I need to put something there. Like, wait a second, how's Tessa a 3/4 elf? She doesn't have pointy ears. And I'm like, all right, Caleb needs to ask that. Elves have pointy ears, and you clearly do not, Tess. I'm a 3/4 elf. So that would be, So that can be helpful with storytelling.
Nice.
But
do we have any other questions or comments or anything you guys want to bring up?
There was an orc. Yes, there was an orc. The secret rooms. Okay, I think y'all caught the reference with that, right?
Oh god, what reference were you going with that?
So one of the questions that I always had when I was a kid playing Legend of Zelda was, why is it when you go and find that secret room, there's just a moblin standing there and there's a treasure chest in front of him and he's like, it's a secret to everyone. I'm like, what the heck? What do you mean? What's the explanation there? So it makes a little more sense when you find the first one. Y'all found the second one, but you still kind of get the gist of it. My idea with the secret rooms was if you stumbled across it and got to have a conversation with that moblin, why? Would that statement make sense? So I was like, how can I make sense of it? And in the first one, Deirdre accidentally walks in there and wakes him up. He's sleeping. And the one in Longdale. And when he wakes up and she's like, oh, don't worry, I won't tell anyone you're here, because he's trying to hide. And he's like, how do I know you're not going to tell anyone that I'm here? And she's like, how about some hush money? And you saw the branching option for the second one. If you haven't gotten the initial one done, Tessa offers or proposes some hush money, and he says the same thing. What is this, a shakedown? And so in that first one, he tells Deirdre, you can't tell anyone I'm here. It's a secret to everyone, okay? So the idea is he bribed her with the treasure chest, what was in there, to keep his location secret because he didn't want to get found. So that was the best explanation I could come up with for a possible scenario in Legend of Zelda on NES when you find the secret rooms. So, and that was why I used that reference. So,
nice.
Orc extortion. Yes, I like that. That's a good way to put it.
Orc-stortion.
Orc-stortion.
There you go. That's what I would say.
Trademark that.
Trademark that. I'm gonna get slapped by Kia. I just know it. Anyway.
What's the most unique thing about your game? I think Murder McNasty was asking that.
Yeah.
I mean, in kind of in relation to what? I mean, I would really say for me, what I could comment on and say it is that I usually try to isolate myself from too many things that are too similar that I could get lazy and pull ideas from. I actually don't play. I stopped playing games to the extent that I did prior to making the game whenever I was making mine. And this probably sounds a little bit pretentious, but I don't want other ideas from games to too easily fit themselves in my head. And so if I'm sitting there going, oh gosh, well, what about this or what about that? And then it's kind of easy for me to just manipulate something from another game from that era. If it's something totally different, like obviously I'm going to play, Mario Odyssey, and I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, I could take that or put that somewhere in Kedemara. But as far as, I mean, what would make my game unique? I really don't have a lot of frame of reference for their RPG Maker games. I'm fairly fresh to the community. I don't know that many people in it, which is why this was so valuable for me. Not only were you guys playing my game, but you were also familiar with the engine and what else is out there on offer. And so that seemed to be a really good, I say focus group. It's a really good pool of knowledge to pull from, because I was kind of going into it blindly. I wasn't sure what a good RPG Maker game looked like or what most of them did look like. I didn't have a frame of reference. So I would say that the one thing that my main focus is with the game is definitely the story, and the characters for the most part, I would say actually trumps the story. I'm a firm believer that everything that can be done most of the time story-wise has already been done. Just like with music, there's, the best music was made in the 1700s by guys wearing white wigs, or so says Frank Zappa. And so it's the same thing with stories. Every story has been told to some degree, and you can kind of put them together in various ways. So characters was my focus for this, because you can have a great story and characters that you just really don't care about, and I mean, you're just not emotionally invested at all. I mean, and we can see lots of all right, so not posting this on my Facebook page.
Sorry. I just itching. That's all. See, how does that
censor
itch?
that. But point being, the focus was on the characters, mainly because if you care about the characters, you'll care about what happens in the story, and it has a whole lot more weight when you're emotionally invested with the characters. So if I had to say what makes it unique, I would probably say the way I would phrase it is, what did I focus the most on? And that would be the characters. Originality as much as I can, and that would be and characters, story. I would love to have a focus on art. I'm just not there on art personally. I would love to have an artist to collaborate with. The first thing I would change would be the battler sprites for my characters. 100%. The next thing I would change would be every single sandworm in the game would be lore act. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. I'm picking at you about that, Hawk. It really is fine.
Okay.
It's totally
I go
fine.
on one little rant.
It's all good. Don't worry about it. It was the fact that was that you cared spoke volumes to me. That told me you were sort of invested. But
yeah, definitely.
One little 6-minute rant. That's funny.
What is it?
But yeah, characters is my focus for the most part. So
cool. Hello, Aaron. How you doing, man? Glad you could join us. We were just talking with Andrew here, the dev of Kedemara, if you hadn't already surmised that. Did you have any questions that you wanted to present to him? Or anything you were curious about with the game? Yeah, I will fight you. Oh yeah, somebody asked, do you have any plans to add cat boys to your game?
Adding cat boys. Well, see, that's where Kedemara, the DLC, which is going to replace all the characters with cat people. That'll be coming sometime in the year 3000 if I'm still alive. No cat boys. Sorry. That's interesting that it was cat boys, no cat girls. We don't want to go that route. That might be.
That's too
actually,
obvious.
now that might be biting
That's-
off more than I can chew.
Oh no.
For introducing that, so.
You kind of addressed that earlier, Aaron. It was mainly to get it out there to more people, and also its ease of updating as well. So that rather than have it in like a Dropbox or something like that, we'd have to constantly maintain it or make sure the link is up for whomever. He just drops his new version on the Steam platform, and it's good for everybody.
Kia, it's by Bubbles. So I don't know if you can see it with the light the way it's angled. These are
Sparkling
very delicious, and they're yeah, sparkling antioxidant infusion. Yeah, by Bubbles. They BAI. Since I'm on the ketogenic diet, it's great because it's so low carb and has like 1 gram of sugar, and it tastes amazing. So
God damn, I don't think they have it in Canada, Kia.
And I will say this though, but Aaron, that decision to put it on Steam was not an easy one. I mean, I almost had an interview process, not in a, will I accept them, but can I not freak out and have a mental breakdown before letting people into my D&D campaigns. And so I kind of had to talk with them for a while, get a feel for it, because, it's really weird. Whenever you have art that you're, writing yourself and things like that, and probably my personality kind of comes into that. It's kind of weird. It's letting somebody into a very intimate part of your mind and your creative space. It's like, sorry to be crass, it's like somebody seeing you naked. You can't undo it. It's and afterwards you think about it constantly. You're like, oh gosh, and there's no taking that back. So putting it out there, I was very nervous about it initially, and I was really, really nervous about how it would get received, and I didn't really know of an option where I could just put it out there and only give the link to certain people. My rationale was that, well, who in the world's going to come across this? And it's not like I've got publishers knocking down the doors asking me for deals. That's definitely not the case. But there's been a surprising amount of people who have, more people than I would have thought randomly, who've played it, who've talked about it. So nice. And have gotten it. So I'm just very thrilled that people enjoyed it, because that's the whole focus. But yes.
Aaron gave a follow-up question. Do you have plans to release it on other platforms like Game Jolt, Itch, etc.?
Itch actually told me that I needed to get it under 1 gigabyte if I wanted to put it up there. So whenever they had told me that, the game started off at 1.2 just for chapter 1, and then it's at about 1.6 right now with all the additions that I've made. And so whenever they said that, and the game was as large as it was, and that's because of the soundtrack takes up a whole lot of space. Yeah. Since it's all like 320 kbps, MP3, super high quality. So that was what took it up the most. That was why I kind of went away from Itch. Itch also really didn't seem to do auto updates as in as friendly a manner as Steam did. It was also, and the other thing is, with my focus being a wide age group, when I would talk with people and they would say, oh, well, I'm at work, because, in a professional office environment, there's a lot of people who are older that I run into. And when I tell them about it, and they're like, oh, well, my kid's 8 or 9 years old. Do you think they would like it? And I'm like, if they like to read, they'll probably like it. And so when I would tell them it's on Steam, and I would write down the name of the game, I could tell the parents, tell the kids it's on Steam, or here's the link for it. Your kid will know what to do. That's actually worked surprisingly well, because they would come back and tell me that they liked it. As a side question to that, a question I get asked a lot of times by parents, friends, and their kids are talking about playing. They're like, "What's the appropriateness of the game?" So, interestingly enough, I don't know if you probably had to do this with your game. Did you get that questionnaire about its rating in Brazil?
I did. Yep, chance? I had to fill that out. Yep.
Mine got rated T for teen. Because it depicts violence against the elderly. Yes. So that was
Yeah.
a really broad.
Yeah. For some reason,
That was
Brazil
a
has
really,
very
really broad thing because I'm
strange.
sitting here just going, and some of the categories I didn't agree with how they put them together. It would
Yeah,
be something
I
along the
agree with
lines
that
of
too.
like, does this feature theft and or rape? And I'm like, those are two very different things. I
Yeah,
don't know
I
that we
felt the
can really
same way.
group those together.
I felt the
Um,
exact same way. I'm like, oh my god, mine doesn't have I think it was like adult language and like hardcore nudity. I'm like, well, yes and then
and
no.
or hardcore
Yeah,
nudity, and
I
you're
was like,
like,
wait, yes but no. Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, I did not like the Brazil thing, but it's like it was very
it wasn't
yeah
exactly that Kia, but it was
yeah,
very
but
close. I
it
want to say that it
was
was something along the line. It was something very unrelated. Um,
that's why I can't steal from that one shop.
yes, that if you haven't checked out the shop in Longdale, check it out. It's
Yeah.
funny because it actually answers one of the questions that
Oh.
people had about theft in the game.
Oh my gosh.
But what as far as appropriateness goes, there's thematic elements that are in the game that are present in classical literature. And
Yeah.
my go-to explanation for most people was, if you're fine with setting your child down and watching Errol Flynn's Robin Hood, you should have no problems with the game. Pure and simple as that. You're going to have some thematics, theatrical violence. You're going to have a lot of other things like that, but it's not gratuitous. And then as far as appropriateness goes, I mean, I was kind of going for family friendly since my first, person I was making the game for was my friend's younger daughter. But I'm not necessarily opposed to what I would probably call calculated ecchi. Um, with the reference humor and things like that, Animaniacs and Freakazoid and Tiny Toons was a real big influence for me. I watched Freakazoid all the time as a kid. I'm sure that was a huge surprise, right? And a lot of times when I was younger, I would watch those shows and just maniacally die laughing, and I didn't even know why. And all the reference humor that I watched as an adult, then it was even funnier. Like, I'm sitting here just going, like, as a kid, I'm like 6, 7. I don't know who Meryl Streep is. So it's like, why should I find that funny? Or, and so then it's kind of a good, they kind of had a really good system. Like, Tom Ruger and the other writers had a really good eloquent solution to that. They made it entertaining for the adults and for the kids. And probably my favorite example of making it child appropriate, but it's still an adult joke. There was a spin-off series that they did called Pinky, Elmira, and the Brain. For those who
Oh
aren't
god,
familiar with
yep.
it, Pinky and the Brain were from Animaniacs. They were two lab mice, and Brain was very smart, Pinky was very dumb. Pinky was on the Caleb spectrum. They were about the same in terms of how deep of thinkers they were. But they had a spinoff that they did where Elmira, who was I believe she was the niece of Elmer Fudd in Tiny Toons.
Yeah.
And she was an unknowing abuser of animals. She loved them so much, she was like, squeeze them to death. And, all this other stuff like that. She didn't know how much she was torturing these animals by accident. She just thought she was loving on them. And, so in their spinoff series where they said, well, what if Pinky and the Brain were Elmira's pets? It doesn't get near as much play as the others did, but it was a fantastic series. It had some funny parts. One of my favorite gags was when Elmira saw Titanic, if I'm remembering this correctly, and she had Pinky and the Brain in a boat, and I believe she had Brain dressed up as Kate Winslet's character Rose in that one, and I think Pinky was Jack, but she had them in a toy boat in the toilet and accidentally flushed it. And so Pinky and the Brain go down into the sewers because they're getting flushed down the toilet, right? And they cut over to them in the sewer pipes, and Pinky says, Brain, I think Elmira's seen Titanic one too many times. And Brain just turns around and says, let's hope she never rents a Clockwork Orange. And so, in my opinion, that's one of the best examples of here's an adult joke, but you can still say it in front of the kids and it's fine.
Yeah.
So there was Panda. The one about Dolly Parton. That one was skirting a little close. So what I think what you're talking about, Brain became a country and western singer at one time. Bubba Bobop Brain, I think
I remember that one.
And he was on a talk show, and Dolly Parton leaned forward, and as we all know, Dolly Parton's a very voluminous woman.
I'll be back. You continue with your story. Be a couple
Sure,
minutes.
absolutely. And so she leaned forward and said, "I'm your biggest fan. What do you have to say to that?" And he said, "I'd say puberty was inordinately kind to you." So that was that was skirting a little bit close. But wow, this is so much more nerve-wracking whenever he's not here. But uh, well, if anybody else has any questions, uh, I know there's a bit of a delay in what all comes up. Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I know it's one of the reasons why I insisted on doing this with talking and webcam instead of kind of explaining in a textual way is through text it can be kind of hard to convey what you're trying to get across, and I'm sure a lot of my stuff sounds very PR friendly, like saying, "Oh, I'm making the game for fun," and things along those lines, and so it can be kind of hard to understand where I'm coming from. Oh, well, thank you. You guys are gonna make me blush. I'm gonna, I'm like Deirdre standing in front of the campfire. My face is all like, oh. But oh, that's a really good question, Wheelman. So the reason why I chose RPG Maker, one would be the ease of use. Um, Another one that I was looking at was Game Maker, but as far as the size of the community, and yeah, I mean, yeah, ease of use is, that was a big thing, but it seemed like as far as resources that people had available, like extra art packs, which was a big deal for me because I don't do art stuff. I don't have any skill with that. Um, that was a big deciding factor for me. And it seemed like the community was very, very yet. Oh no, nope. I have tried. I have tried since I was 5, 6 years old. I won't. I won't bring up my failed art stories from middle school, but let me just say that I gave it the old college try, the old high school try, the old. I've tried art several times. It's just not my thing. And so, as far, I would love to find a collaborator. That was one of the other reasons to go off of the question Aaron had, was that I was using it as a promotional piece to find an artist. And then, and it was funny because Ross, the Scotsman, a friend of mine, that's the creative designer on that game I was talking about, he suggested that, as did his sound design guy, Jose. And they said, well, if you want to find people, you got to show them what you got. You got to show them what they have to work with. And I've I've been up in the air on what the best time to do it is, because my knee-jerk reaction has been to know the scope of what I need. Um, oh, are you serious? Honestly, guys, I'm not even kidding. I know I don't want to come off sounding like I'm trying to look for pity or sympathy here or anything like that. But if anyone does like it and you want to connect as far as art or something along those lines, I would absolutely love to do that. The one thing that I do get in a conundrum about is that um, I don't necessarily know the exact scope of what I would need done. And so most of the artists that I've talked with have been, and understandably, they've wanted to do it commission style. They've wanted to have money up front for it, which is totally fine. And so for a lot of people, this is a living that they're making off of it. So I don't fault them for that. The bad part is that I don't really know exactly what I will need perpetually. So if I could point to it and say, I need sprite sheets for this, I need this, I need that, or I need this edit made or that edit made, it would be a lot easier for me to give them an idea of the scope. Um, I can tell you right now, for the entire game, I mean, I don't really have, $5,000 on tap to give as far as art stuff goes, but yeah, and I mean, and that's why I mean, coming from the D&D community, I don't want to diss on the indie dev community, because RPG Maker community, at least the ones that I've run into with you guys, has been different than the one that I've run across. I had a pretty bad situation. Yeah, I can get a real worm. Thank you. I had a bit of a bad experience, which is one of the reasons why I was afraid to kind of go onto Steam as well. Uh, I was I was basically going in and communicating with a group of people that looked down on even using RPG Maker, and you know, well, the thing is, Aaron, it was overwhelmingly there was more negativity. One of the things that I got labeled as was an ideas guy, simply because I didn't have an incredibly firm grasp on C# and artwork. And so what was tossed back at me was, well, what do you actually do? You don't do anything. And so that was a little bit rough to hear. And so it was very apparent to me after that I was after something very different than a lot of these people were, because most of them, and understandably so, if they got college degrees in game design and that's their living, financial compensation or trying to get student loans paid off is totally understandable. Or if this is their career, that's understandable. It seemed like they either thought I was being disingenuous or they thought I had ulterior motives because I wasn't looking to, charge any money for it. And the idea was, well, learn to do it, and then then you can charge money. And so then I asked, well, what if I don't want to charge money? What if I'm just happy making a game and want people to play it and have fun? And yeah, Unity, yeah, I didn't want to call any names up, but I would definitely say there was some Unity users. But the interesting thing is that I felt very downtrodden about this, and I thought to myself, I should just hang this up. This is silly. This is really dumb. And then that was when the guy that I'd been talking about before, Ross, my Scotsman buddy, literally he lives in Scotland. He's a great guy. He reached out to me and he said, don't be so down on yourself. He said, I'm a creative director, and he said, quite honestly, he said, when you get with the right team, when you find other people that want to do the same things as you, and so, he said, maybe I can, find some groups for you to go with. And I told him, I was like, well, I have kind of a demo of my game. And then I ran it past him and another colleague of his named Jose, who does sound design. And both of them were like, I basically had chapter 1 pretty much done. It was about ready to release in a couple of weeks. And so he's like, oh gosh, what are you waiting for? He goes, dude, you already have this. He goes, these guys don't even have anything. And he said, put it out there, just make it as a placeholder. And he said, get yourself visible. And he said, if people like it, they'll show up. They'll want to, they'll want to help you out. They want to be a part of it and things like that. And I mean, through the combination of my sister's support, his, some of my D&D friends who were also supportive whenever I had brought all this stuff up, it kind of gave me that push to get myself out there and exposed into the Steam realm and things like that. And then it kind of gave me a little bit more of a confidence and footing to say, you're going to have naysayers and you're going to have people that are going to think that you're not doing things properly no matter what you do. And another thing that he had told me was that these guys that are barking at you about using RPG Maker instead of Unity, and he said, you think about it, back in the old days, they made their own game engines for each game. They're using an open source engine. They didn't code that themselves. And so he said, don't beat yourself up too much about that. He said, you do you. If you're inspired, when there's people who want to be a part of that, come across it, they'll come along, and you'll know the right people whenever you meet them. So that was I'm sorry to get so heavy on that. Y'all y'all didn't sign up to be my therapist here, did you? But I mean, and I say that just to say that if there's anybody that's on the fence about that, and anybody that's feeling self-conscious about putting their game out or something along those lines, it's there's going to be situations where you're going to get criticism from people, and you're going to get misrepresented or things like that. But then there's sometimes whenever the wheel randomly lands on your game and you get a cool group of people who play RPG Maker games that run through and give you some very fair and warranted tips and changes that should be made to your game. So, and that's totally fine. I will say this though, out of some of the things that everyone did complain about, well, maybe I should wait until Hawk gets back, because these are some of the things that he did say could use some changing. But yep. And here's the thing, Kia. I used to say this to people all the time. Here, I'm gonna go into the encouragement role now. Whenever I was DMing, which I am infinitely more comfortable being a dungeon master than I am being a game designer. I would have people that would play and they would get super stoked about it and things like that, and they would say, "Oh man, DMing must be really hard." And my first follow-up question would be, "Do you want to try it?" And a lot of people, "Oh no, I couldn't
Go to
DM.
the
No,
fucking
I could
show."
never do that." And I said, "Well, you haven't tried, and you'll never know until you try." And so then I would reference a couple of things, like I said, you come in here every week, and you made your own character, you rolled for them, you role play for your own character. You're getting comfortable with that. I said, honestly, here's the fun part. As a DM, it's really not as much about playing a character as helping the other people play their characters and giving them you're the Drew Carey, like on Whose Line Is It Anyway? That's probably one of the best analogies you could use for a dungeon master. You're a host for the game. You're the person who's facilitating other people getting a stage to express themselves and put out their characters and things like that. And yeah, it's a process. My first D&D adventure just stunk. It was way too railroaded. But after a while, it was great because then I had where all four of my players in one of them, I had been to games that they DM'd and they were great. It was fantastic. And do I have any funny D&D? Oh boy, oh gosh. I'll keep it to the game. Maybe maybe if I think somebody asked if I had a streaming channel as well. I have a retro gaming one, where it's just me playing some older games, called Between the Scan Lines. I started it up a little while ago. I've only done one. I streamed some NES Disney games a while back, and I'd kind of like to keep that separate from the game stuff, just because it feels like it's two separate things, and I can kind of step away from getting on a tangent about the game, because as you can tell, it's very easy for me to do that and get long-winded. Um, but there was another question I think uh, Kia had. Oh well, yeah. Well, mine's kind of a beard with a very, very pathetic jawline area is really what mine is. It's like I said, couldn't grow any facial hair till I was 19. That was the inspiration for
And this is when
Corin and
we
my
banned
slow
Aaron.
to masculinized face. Oh, you want funny D&D stories? Oh gosh. Let's see. I'm gonna try and think of something that's appropriate for the stream. I want to keep this as family friendly as possible, but
You've committed one of the classic blunders, believing this is a
yeah,
family-friendly stream.
this is a family friendly stream, or at
This
least
is- yeah.
myself.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
One of them, well, I'll say this. This one is this one's actually this one was a result of me screwing up and needing to play it off. So I was playing, believe it or not, in someone else's campaign. It was Out of the Abyss. Somebody was running that, and one of my characters, my first character when I was a player in Dungeons and Dragons, was an orc named Crag. Now Crag, Kragh, he was my main character in World of Warcraft. And so when I had to think something up, I was like, okay, orc barbarian doesn't get much more stock than that. And so the funny part was that when I was going to jump into playing D&D, I was way more into it than the other guys who were playing, in terms of preparation, or what I thought I was supposed to do to prepare. It was like the person who shows up with like a tuxedo on and everybody's in flip-flops and shirts. So I was like, I got to get a voice down for this person. I have to have a backstory. I have to do all this. And like none of that came into play. I had like notes on the side for myself. So Crag, being this 7'6" orc, big guy. And so it was basically just me trying to do my best at like Cookie Monster mixed with Mr. Krabs as the vocal impression for him. And so I'm going through the whole thing. My throat's killing me. but Crag was my character, and so that was who I played as when I did. And I had DM'd for a while, and then I joined this Out of the Abyss campaign as a player. And so Crag was kind of dim-witted, and he sort of played a talking Chewbacca role in this campaign. The person that was that husband and wife friends of mine that had the daughter that was special needs. This was them. This was one of the campaigns when their friends was running. And so the husband in that group, his character was my little buddy, and that was what Crag called everyone that was shorter than him, which was basically everyone since he was like 7'6". So they had a Chewbacca Han Solo kind of relationship with one another. Now Crag was lovable and dumb as a rock. I mean, he makes Caleb look like Einstein. So the setting for this was we're drow elves, which are like evil dark elves, had imprisoned us, and they were subjecting us to manual labor. And the DM did this thing where he would cut back over to characters after a certain period of time. Okay, well, what are you doing? Okay, well, we're in a different place, but what are you doing? So I thought, all right, I got to have a really good zinger whenever he comes back over to me. And I wasn't really thinking and paying attention. It was in the heat of the moment. So Crag is over there sweeping up and cleaning this place at crossbow point. And there's this dwarven woman who's also a slave. And Crag doesn't speak Undercommon like the drow do. So he's just talking with her. They cut into the conversation and they're like, okay, DM's like, okay, what are you and I forget what her name was, like Freya or something like that. What are y'all talking about? So I was like, okay, you cut in. The only thing I could think of was Craig just saying human boobs better than elf boobs. And so I forgot that she was not only a female, but
what?
I didn't have much of any frame of reference for that portion of the story. I had forgotten. It was late at night. And so he's like, Freya stares at you very confused. And so it seemed like something Crag would have talked about. Now, the follow-up portion of that scene was that there was a spider that came out, and the drow worship spiders. So Crag smashes the spider with his hand because he doesn't like them. Well, they go and they just riddle him full of arrows, poisoned arrows, crossbow bolts, right? And then he passes out. It takes him like 4 shots each because my rolls were just like on fire that night. Like I was crit rolling 20s, and the DM's like, okay, they reload and shoot you again for the 3rd time. I'm like, Craig's a big boy, okay? It's hard to
He's a big boy.
He's 7'6". And so finally, I pass out. And when Craig wakes up, he's in front of Mistress Ilvara, who was the head mistress of this slave encampment. She's a drow elf, and she has a tentacle wand. No kidding. That wasn't in the Out of the Abyss, campaign manual. The DM just made that up. I'm like, a tentacle wand. Something's wrong with you. So she goes, and Crag is completely and totally oblivious to the fact that he smushed a spider and they worship them. So he thinks that it's because he insulted elf boobs and said human boobs were better. So she's over here about to knock him out, and Craig's just like,
Craig, sorry. Elf boobs, wonderful. They shapely. They very nice. Totally better than human boob.
And she still beats him to death with this tentacle wand. So from that point on in the campaign, Craig not only had a fear of tentacles and drow elf women, which was funny because one of them was in the party, and later on, that wife and the husband and wife pair, my friends, her character explained to Craig, listen, spiders are special to drow people. And Craig's like,
Craig don't know this word special. What it mean?
She's like, spiders are like boobs.
Oh, Craig, get now.
So she it was interesting. So that was one of mine as a player. Craig was a fan favorite usually. He was and he's in Kedemara 4, by the way. He's part of the cast in that one.
Oh my God.
Now one of my ones as a DM that I think probably is interesting is, and this was a recent one, something y'all. So Amy from Kedemara, this has some semblance to her. This is the character she was basically she was pulled out of this campaign and put into this one. But in the D&D campaign, Amy had a pet donkey named Mr. Giggles. And Mr. Giggles was always around Amy, and what happened was she in the campaign she had been kidnapped by kobolds, and somehow Mr. Giggles wasn't able to get a hold of them. I think he was tied up in the stable. So what the players had to do was go find Amy, and Mr. Giggles was coming along with them. Now, here's where that whole being able to think on your feet thing has to work. One of the players was a druid and had speak with animals. So he's like, okay, I can't speak with animals to ask Mr. Giggles if he knows how to find Amy. And I'm like, I'm like, I didn't count on someone wanting to have a conversation with a donkey. So I had to think, what on earth would a donkey say? So I kept it simple at first, and I was like, I can smell my lady and all that. And so he's like, okay, good, take us to her. So I started doing that, and then I decided to have a little fun with it. And so the donkey stopped, and then he nudged the druid real quick, and the druid's like, what? I mean, I cannot exude like how intense this player was whenever I stopped him. He's like, what's happening? And the donkey says, look over there. He's like, yes. Do you see that boulder over there? And the druid's like, yes, what about it? And the donkey just goes, I like that boulder. That's a nice boulder. And then the guy just goes, oh dear God, Shrek references. So and then my player that had to move, Sarah, she goes, are we looking for a blue flower with red thorns or anything like that later on? Can we just get ahead of the Shrek jokes? So, yeah, those are two nice ones from D&D.
Nice.
So
Nice.
DM and then as a player, I'm going to stop myself on D&D stuff because I could go all night. But yeah, so Kedemara stuff. I'm trying to think if there was something else I ran across. Oh, I was gonna say this. You were gone though. As far as some of the changes, two of the ones that probably stood out the most that I was going, yes, fair, that needs to change. Besides the nameplates on the windows and the main menu. So you guys, along with absolutely everybody else that's live streamed the game, have all said the same thing about Tessa playing the organ in Port Brahma's Tavern. So I have manipulated that scene to be a little bit more sensible and thematic whenever the music stops. So as of right now, the music fades from the background that's typically playing. Tessa cracks her knuckles and then says that she's going to quote unquote lay down some epic toots on those pipes and starts playing, and then the whole building goes dark and there's lightning and it shakes, and then it goes back to normal after she's done playing Toccata and Fugue in D minor. Or one of the other songs in the list that you can play, of course. So that was one that I was going, yeah, that's definitely a change that needs to get made, and that was a really good suggestion. Another one that I don't think I got that much. What's I'm trying to think about the best way to phrase this. I didn't really like it bothered anybody that too much, but watching other people play it, it felt kind of cringe. So the Bohemian Rhapsody reference, I was like, no, that needs some work. That was a little too like, right in the face with that one. So the way I changed that one is Deirdre still follows it up saying thunderbolts and lightning. Tessa interjects and tells her that thunderbolts are technically impossible since they're made of sound. And then later on, I realized, well, if you mixed coffee grounds with, white tea, of course you can start seeing sounds. But she says that. I've changed Amy's to saying that this is frightening, very, very frightening. And then what I believe is the coup de grace, Caleb quotes the wrong Queen song by saying dynamite with a laser beam. So he's quoting from Killer Queen instead of Bohemian Rhapsody. And then the scene just goes on from there, which I thought is suiting for Caleb. So it's
Nice.
That was one where I just went, yeah, that was cringe, the way it was initially. So y'all's input on that was helpful in improving it
Nice,
and making
nice.
it better. And I like it a lot better now than it was prior. I'll admit it wasn't, it needed some work there. But
Your game's not cringe, Aaron. Shut up.
Aaron, you've got a game too?
A lot of people in here actually have. Got a lot
snap.
of devs that hang out here. So Yeah,
That's
he has
cool.
2. Mr. 2. Ooh, look at me.
Ooh,
I'm developing a second one. Ooh.
man. Sorry, not to turn this into your Q&A, Hawk. How many games do you have?
Oh, got me? Just one.
Just one? Okay,
Just one.
yeah.
I've only just done the one. I have ideas for others, but just gotta work on them. That's all.
I hear you.
Actually,
That mental exhaustion post work is brutal.
it is. Yeah.
Where you can't think of dialogue and things like that.
Yeah.
And
I
well,
suppose, Aaron.
I
if
mean,
you
hey,
really
come
want
on, Aaron. I want to hear
Yeah,
about it.
sure,
I
go ahead.
definitely do.
I started with novels, then I
But you have
tried my hand
novels?
again. Yeah, I've written
No
4
way.
novels. Yeah.
Oh, snap.
Uh, 4th one, Obsidian, is in the middle of editing right now, so hopefully I'll have it out sometime this year. But I got 3 self-published out there right now.
Man, see, that's the thing. There's so much talent in this, and I always feel terrible whenever I don't know about it until later on. I mean, okay, cool. I'm gonna copy that real quick, Aaron. I will definitely. Oh, and it's on Steam. Awesome.
I recommend it. It's a good game.
Cool beans. I will definitely check that out. Um, yes. Oh, I'm gonna be grabbing everybody's. Absolutely. I don't want to. Now, here's the thing, though. I might have to wait until I'm done at least with Kedemara 1 before I play them because I don't want anybody to, think I'm stealing their ideas.
Yes.
But because y'all might have some good. Well, yeah, I will say this. I was kind of getting on a tirade about this before with the non-RPG maker indie dev community, and it just kind of having a very different attitude as opposed to the D&D community, because it was a very I don't want to say that I'm speaking because it was just a couple of groups that I ran into, and I'm sure there's a lot of great people out there, and it's usually the sometimes the people that should be talking the least are the ones talking the loudest. So I don't want this to necessarily be me making a broad statement about indie devs outside of the RPG Maker community in general. But I'd say there was a lot of vitriol with picking RPG Maker as the engine with my game when I had brought that up, and also other things along those lines, which just kind of blew my mind because with D&D, it was a situation where it just felt like there was a more community aspect with that in terms of there was one of my when I gave up on D&D, one of my players who's still a friend of mine and he's one of my play testers was like, hey man, I know this sounds a little bit weird, your story content for Bannon or Gilded Isles, can I have any of that? And I was like, dude, you can take you can run it. I have no problem at all with doing that. However you want to take it, if you want the world building stuff, it's cool. And that just seems like such a foreign thing, partly by necessity because of legality when it comes to releasing a game and things like that. But just even just with other community, that was why I was kind of drawn to this. It seemed to have a more community feel than other ones that I ran into.
Yeah, RPG, I mean, it has kind of a bad stigma, and there's even a stigma within RPG Maker as well for those that use just the base graphics RTP. I personally never prescribe to it. I think a game should be held on the merits of its story, Aaron. But yeah, it's kind of looked at as like kind of the ugly stepchild of the game making engine community and whatnot, and it's mostly because, and it's both true and it's also true of any engine, is that a lot of people use the base assets but they don't put any effort into it. Just throw out a game, it's garbage, for lack of a better word, and
Right.
they act like it's the next best thing, and they get big heads about it, and they get insulted when you tell them, okay, well, this didn't work and here's why, and blah blah. Even we go out of it, like we had a whole big thing with the developer of a game called Keep Shop Keeping. He is no longer on Steam because he was doing fake reviews. But I digress.
Ooh. Well,
no, he's like the only one where I try and go at things from a civil tone.
I'm sorry to interject.
But,
fake reviews, as in like he was paying for them, or he was just getting people to.
We don't know if he was paying for them or not. We assume he was, but it was a lot of like things that didn't make any sense. Oh, best thing since Final Fantasy. This made me think of Legend of Zelda, and had nothing to do with that. And the game was just absolute garbage, like literal garbage. And I try and be.
No, that's. But I mean, one of the things that I worry a lot about, and I think with as much reference humor as I do, it's probably a very relevant question. What's the line between paying homage and plagiarism? And that's very, very tough.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of times where, like with the It's a Secret to Everything, and It's a Secret to Everyone, and the whole Hero of the Ages being a kind of a jab at the Hero of Time from Legend of Zelda. You know, you wonder at what point are people just going, he's just ripping this off. He's just, doing this or doing that. And I mean, it's kind of, I don't know if anybody keeps up with Dragon Ball Z Abridged and kind of what's going on there with them. But obviously they've kind of gotten some bite back because they're like, geez, make your own content. And, to a certain degree, you want to go, people will parody things that they love. And if they do love it, it's going to be a good job that they'll do on it. When you can tell whenever it's done with heart, and whenever it's done just thinking this will be a quick way to make money, or I hate this. I think it's brutally apparent when somebody's just trying to criticize something or make commentary on something in a veiled way. And I just throwing it out there. I know there's probably going to be a lot of people. I haven't run into any yet, but there's eventually probably going to be people that are going to ask what parallels that they can draw from my game in current situations in the world and things like that. And just to get it on the record, I will say that I thought about that a great deal whenever I was making it. And one of the people that I think blew my mind the most with storytelling was, and I went into this blind as well, was J.R. Tolkien. And I saw Lord of the Rings when I was about 13 in theaters. Fellowship of the Ring came out then. Really dating myself here. And when I saw that, just totally blew my mind. And the interesting thing was that at age 13, I didn't even really understand the term allegory and what it meant and how deep that was. But you had so many parallels that you could draw between his story and either what he was going through or things in any time. And I was so fascinated with that literary element that every single time that I did something, I tried so hard to make sure that it was relatable, that people could say, is this or that? Is he thinking about this, or this could go to this? When you pick certain themes, you don't have to worry about your story becoming dated, because when it's too focused on something and it's brutally apparent, then it becomes dated very quickly. But I mean, you sit there and think about all these different elements, issues with parents, issues with fitting in, Latessa not fitting in and being different than the other kids. That's something that traverses generations. Orphans, you have orphans in every millennia of history. Something that you're, or not knowing your family, not knowing about your past. With Amy, more of her story and stuff like that comes along that'll explain her character. But there's so many different themes that get brought up, and if you keep them vague enough, if you look at things that everyone can relate to, it seems to kind of traverse that, and it doesn't necessarily become that way. But that to say that I'm sure that there's, and intentionally so, lots of things that people can draw from it, and I hope they would have personal experiences that they can relate to any of this stuff with. I know my sister often says, she's like, I feel for Deirdre. I just feel for her. She gets me. Oh, I think we have another question.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one, Aaron. That's a good one, Aaron.
Why going episodic instead of the whole thing? I'll admit that is definitely I would say that's a development-based decision. One, because what we're doing right now wouldn't probably have happened or anything like that if I hadn't gotten the game out. And what's the word I'm looking for? I would have, if the time it would have taken for me to finish the game, which it's 4 chapters, it would have been 20 plus hours to probably hit everything that I wanted. And right now it's looking like it's going to be more than 20 by the time chapter 4 is done. I would have been so far down the pipe and not getting or having that unbiased feedback. And I mean, I don't want to detract from the people that are my dedicated playtesters and friends and my D&D friends. I totally appreciate what they do, and it's a huge help. But that element of people who don't know you and don't know your personality and things like that, the random reviews and things along those lines was so helpful. And that was something that was very, very necessary. And if I had gotten far enough to go through and get all the way done to chapter 4 and have my 20 plus hours of gameplay, I can tell you right now, I wouldn't have it in me to go back and fix the things that I would have needed to in chapter 1 had I just kept going. I wouldn't have had that motivation. So we're doing it episodic. It's also easier for people to play it in, chunks. I'll say the other thing that I was very floored by was that you you read all the dialogue you came across, and you played through the whole thing. I had a couple of people that played it and gave up in about 30 minutes, and were like, too much talking, and I'm like, it says story rich in the tags for the
Aaron.
game, guys. And so I was kind of like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean for it to be that long. But so that was having that kind of reaction and having that kind of feedback when it was done a chapter at a time also makes it a bit more palatable for people, because more people are willing to jump into a game that they can get done in 2 or 3 hours. There's 5+ hours of content if you hit everything. Might be more than that now that I think about it.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit easier to ask people to play a game when you're like, oh, it's like 5 hours of content, but you can get through it in 2-3 hours. Still difficult, when it's a cold request, just saying, hey, could you play my game? And so that kind of makes it a little bit easier to do. If somebody just hears straight up like this is a 25+ hour game, some people will go great, and other people are just like, no thank you, don't have time. So hopefully that'll end up being a good introduction and things along those lines. And I will say this on record: the only time that if I had an artist that was full time and I had a totally original soundtrack and everything like that, and there was a remaster done. I don't know how you can do a remaster of a game that's not even 2 years old. Let me put it this way: if people wanted a ramped up version of Kedemara 1 after it was done, Chapter 4 was done, and everything was done to my satisfaction, I would still have at least Chapter 1 as it stands for free as a demo, just because it's honestly, like with the story, you got to sell people on the characters, and you got to do all that, and it is difficult to get people to sit down, and I want to make that as easy for them to do as possible. So I will cut my rambling off right there, but because I'm sure there's probably some good comments. I think I got some story support from people that are like, yeah, for story, alrighty.
No,
y'all are getting friend requests. Absolutely.
It's kind of an ongoing thing. Aaron is very gameplay focused. Even though he made his own game, and his own game is story heavy, he's very gameplay focused, and he tends to like shut down whenever a story gets a bit too wordy and whatnot. I don't hate you, Aaron. I just it's sad that you're wrong.
Well,
and I
actually,
pray for you.
It's interesting because this is one of the things I still kind of wrestle with while I'm making Chapter 2, and definitely wrestled with when I was making Chapter 1. How much do I make voluntary, and how much do I make involuntary when it comes to cutscenes, dialogue, and content? I mean, one of my D&D guys knew how to get from the start of Chapter 1 to the end of it, and he's like, went through the text, did absolutely everything. He got through it in an hour and a half. Not going to the extra stuff, just straight from front to back, nowhere to go. And it was funny because that made me sit there and think, should I have been a bit more forceful with stuff? But it is kind of hard to get around having to do the Tessa tips, because most people, if they hear like, hey, you want to hear tips about how to play the game? Well, let's be honest, even first timers are probably going to say nope. And it kind of reminds me of the I don't know how many people have heard the brown M&Ms story about Van Halen.
Oh yeah.
So they were, if anybody doesn't know, notoriously they had this in their contracts that there was to be a bowl of M&Ms in their dressing room, and there's not to be a single brown M&M in it. And if there was one, they would trash the dressing room. The guys from Van Halen. And initially we're like, oh, here's pompous rock stars being jerks. And it was funny because my boss actually told me the story. He's a real big metalhead. And he had said that what Eddie Van Halen said the reason why was because if they read through the contract and they didn't catch a detail like that, chances are they weren't paying attention to the important stuff either, or they just didn't flat out read it. And so that's one of those situations where you kind of go, you don't want to be too forceful, but you're like if I'm telling you, it's probably necessary information. It's probably important. And yeah, dialogue can get boring after a while. I totally realize that the characters jumping, running around, the emote balloons, other things like that. A lot of that stuff got added in later. Most of it was just straight up text.
Wow.
I know the pauses in the text can get a little bit annoying. I apologize for that. But it's that's my way of kind of giving some flavor to how their cadence of speech is. It's very hard without voice acting.
It is. Yes.
That would
100%.
honestly be art first, just because I feel like it would possibly be easier to do. But voice acting is one of those things where I go, every time I bring it up to myself, I'm like, oh, all right, how much would it really cost? How difficult would it really be? And it's always okay, let's see. I thought I saw a good question. It's like a Tessa themed game.
Oh God.
Oh, well, I'll kind of get to Aaron's comment. So things being wordy, it's really weird when it's text versus voice acting, and that's another thing I've had to adapt a whole lot to, because with D&D, acting out my scene with Craig and his statement about the superiority of human boobs to elf boobs, it's hard to get the voice of Craig without, hearing somebody do an impression of some goofy Cookie Monster sounding guy and then the cadence of speech. And so it's a very different headspace for me to get in when it's just text that I can do it in and things like that. And so dialogue is something that I always try to refine. I go back constantly, and I have made revisions to dialogue so many times just because I've gone to, I really need that many words. And then the other big one, will this fit in the text box? Which I do a whole lot. But somebody said they wanted a Tessa themed game. There are plans. I'm going to leave it at that. There are plans.
Oh, God.
I'll just put it this way. Kedemara 1 does not have Tessa as the main character, and there may or may not be a game where Tessa is the main character. Someday. We will see.
There
we
go.
will see.
I think we've been going for about 3 hours now. I think it's probably
snap!
good.
Has it been that long?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. That's the whole point. That was the whole point for tonight. I'm thinking it's probably going to be a good point to call it a night for that, unless anyone else has any other pressing or like really quick questions or comments or anything like that. Do you want to give Andrew here? Crickets.
Well, while we are waiting for stuff, well, thank you. I appreciate that, Aaron.
You're a good man.
I appreciate that. One thing I will say, I'm gonna shamelessly self-promote here for a minute. Honestly, the absolute biggest help that people can do, and it doesn't cost a dime, downloads for the game, playtime for the game, reviews for the game, hopefully positive. Please play the update that I just did. I've made changes, please. So that just any of the stuff like that helps so much with visibility on the game. They give you bumps. I think they give you about 5 bumps that you can use for the lifetime of the app. That'll put you up to the top of listings for it and things like that. And they give you all kinds of fun little Steam demographics. And, you start off going really, really high because you've got so much visibility. And then as soon as that goes away, it's like, kind of goes down significantly. So I would say if you guys do like it, or maybe if you haven't made your mind up about it, please be sure to grab it, try it out. Let me know what you think. I think at the end of the credits, and I'll probably post this as well, I try to respond to any comments that I get or any questions. Please bear with me. Like I said, I'm not a programmer. There were some things that were things for me. I didn't know you could full screen the game until a week ago whenever you did it. I'm not even joking. I was sitting here and I haven't had a question. I'm just going to be straight up honest.
Wow.
I had a question from somebody that played the game, and they're like, can you do full screen on this game? And I'm like, crap, well, it's technically JavaScript based, and I'm like way over engineering this, and I'm like, I guess it only runs like a web browser window. So I'm like, still working on it, but I don't know if the development engine really has this as a built-in feature, when really all I had to do was hit F4. the entire time. And so then I went back and I was just like, hit F4 and it'll go to full screen now. So that's
now. Nice.
now it will go with a hit of F4. So
Don't hit F. Oh god. Yeah,
but I
I
do check the email address every now and then. Of course, there's the Facebook page. If you guys want to like that, if anybody else still has a Facebook out there, I don't know. I'm a little older, so I'm a little out of date on that. I did hop in on the Discord server.
Yep.
I'm Picanha Desu, as a Mungadao reference. Yeah, so, and if y'all, there's the email address, ancientearthgames@gmail.com. If you find bugs or you have anything else you'd like to bring up or questions you want to ask me, please. Nothing thrills me more than talking about the game, as y'all can tell, since I've rattled on for like over 3 hours.
Damien has asked a question. I don't know if you want to answer it or not, but he has indeed asked a question. I will leave that up to you.
Let me put it this way. I'll go ahead and number things so I can answer that. The last one of those, I hear if they are thick, save lives. And I will just say that sometimes the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. So since I was quite skilled in making euphemisms for different things, with my line of work or analogizing things, I'll say that would be my answer there. It is.
Oh my god. Spoken like
it is the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. So we want to think about all things as a broad scope. Same as we do with stories. There's my wrap up for that.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything before we go?
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, so other than the game self-promotion, I'm not sure how much I'm going to be doing streaming, but that's one of my other things. Oh, another thing to look out for, and I'll probably post about this. One of my other promotional ideas that I'm going to have is doing hashtag tips by Tessa PSAs. And I'm going to make short little 1 to 2 minute skits in RPG Maker that I'll post on YouTube. And it will be Tessa giving the right advice to kids for the wrong reason. So take, for instance, 2 kids are out camping in the wilderness and they're like, we don't have any food. Let's just get some berries. Now, we all know that eating berries you just find in the forest is a bad idea, especially when it's mixed with wisp magic. But Tessa reminds them that sometimes there's bears who are very tired from their jobs selling bulk insurance to corporations and they don't feel like going and getting salmon. So leave those berries there for the tired bears who just came home from work. Yes. Are you surprised by this, Hawk?
No,
so
I'm not one bit.
the idea is, the theme of PSAs that they had on Saturday morning cartoons when we were kids. And so it's Tessa giving advice like a PSA.
At least it's
that
not
is the right advice for the totally wrong reason. So
not,
that's keep an eye out for those. I might be making those sometime soon.
At least it's not
I think I've sufficiently promoted myself enough already. I'll step back on that and not toss it in you guys' face anymore. So, but yeah.
I was gonna say at least it's not skits where she's trying to hawk Hostess fruit pies to the kids.
Do what?
Do you ever see those things at the ends of comics with like the Hulk trying like Hostess fruit pies and all that? That's dating me right there. That is dating me right there.
I remember those. Remember those. But yeah, I mean, but I'll close with saying, well, first off, man, thanks for having me on here. I appreciate it.
Good God, what was that?
I appreciate everybody else who stuck around, you for playing the game, and everybody who stuck around and watched it. And yeah, hope that somebody else I get to see one of y'all's games and hear y'all. Okay, I don't want to hijack your platform. Hopefully, somebody else will someday get to do a Q&A on their game over here too.
This was good.
If Hawk is so inclined, it is his channel.
This was good. I mean, there's nothing. I thought it was good. It was informative. Answered some general questions that we all had about the game, and it was a good way to get to see more into your development process as well. And it's something that I've been kind of wanting to do, but I've never actually bit the bullet and gone ahead with it. So I don't see anything wrong with doing more of these in the future. So I'm definitely this kind of opens the door. We'll see more about doing more in the future. So
happy to be blazing a trail with you.
Well, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. Even though it was your idea, but I do appreciate it. So.
Hey, it's fine, man. So
yeah. We found out you are
actually a great guy. Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Parker.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I definitely wanted people to not think I was a creeper. That's a high thing on my list, especially if I would have text said, "Oh, my game's targeted to kids." I felt like I needed some context to that statement, so didn't want to get any misinterpretation there. So,
Yeah.
mhm.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me, everybody. Appreciate it. I hope you all enjoyed this as much as we did talking about stuff.